Dragu?
Present.
Wolf?
Here.
Right.
All right, so now that we're called to order, are there any suggestions for changes for the agenda order? Any suggestions going one more time? All right, seeing no suggested changes, we'll move on to public comment. I just want to flag that you all.
Oh, sorry. I think we have folks here for multi-family building smoking ban subcommittee. I was wondering if it would be okay with Commissioner Ward to move that a little bit closer to the top,
We can work that out with the
maybe
chairs.
after item 10.
No, it's fine with me.
Okay.
Took 5 going to after 10.
10 going to after 5.
Sorry,
Sorry,
13 going after 10. Okay, so moved with that change.
So it's been so moved to move item 13 behind item 10.
Yes.
Ooh.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been seconded. All those in favor? Or, you know,
Aye.
motion, all those opposed? Any abstentions?
As long as you still have a little time.
All right, motion passes with 7 and 1 abstention. Okay, so with that, we will move on to approval of the March 13th minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? Commissioner Wolf?
I so
Also
move to
moved.
approve.
There's been a motion to approve the minutes. Is there-
Second.
It's been a second by Commissioner Sharanko. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the March 13th minutes, please raise your hand. All right, all opposed, all abstentions, seeing none, motion passes.
Did you have any cards for number 3?
Oh, you're totally right, I totally skipped public comment. So for public comment, basically there's 2 opportunities to speak. You can speak in the general public comment section as to any topic you'd like to speak to, or you can speak immediately before the item is actually discussed by the commission. All speakers will be given a maximum of 3 minutes, and we'll try to time you, and if you'd like to transfer your time to another speaker, you're able to do so, if you'd like to sacrifice your own speaking time. So with that, we'll open the floor up to general public comment, for people who'd like to speak broadly on either any item or any item on the agenda. So with that, are there any public comment speakers?
So I later want to, I'm speaking my individual capacity. Later, I want to speak to item 13. Pardon?
I just want to make sure we can the time.
So later, I'll speak to item 13 when that's about to come up. But I want to speak to another issue that, just as in item 13, is an ordinance that passed but is difficult, has been difficult to enforce, and is not being enforced. And that's the source of income anti-discrimination ordinance, which was passed back in July of 2017. And that was intended to prohibit landlords from discriminating against persons that come in with Section 8 vouchers, Shelter Plus certificates, or any VASH or any other subsidy. Unfortunately, this is being violated throughout Berkeley, and there isn't really been good tracking of it, and there also hasn't been enforcement of it. There are some problems with the ordinance possibly, where it's too involved with a private right of action, and attorneys are going to be reluctant to take these cases for the small penalties that are involved. But since I spoke to this issue at a city council meeting, and the mayor did direct it to the city manager and the city attorney to explore, and I know the mayor's office is very interested in seeing that we can do something about it, because landlords throughout Berkeley are violating this. I've talked to people where landlords will upfront tell them, I don't take Section 8. And this became even more apparent when there were 30 vouchers given out that are called net vouchers, which are non-elderly disabled, and they were administered by the hub, and those 30 individuals are having great difficulty. One of them, who was told by 5 landlords in 2 weeks that they wouldn't take her Section 8 voucher, finally went to Saha. So, but the idea was to open up vouchers throughout the community. This is gonna be a major issue with us talking about more subsidies possibly coming through the city to house homeless persons under the 1,000-person plan. We're gonna have to have housing in Berkeley, and to have that housing, we're gonna have to look to every possible alternative, and that definitely includes enforcing this ordinance against private landlords.
My name is Stephanie Allen. I'm not speaking on behalf of faculty. That's the responsibility of the Berkeley Federation of Teachers, but I am speaking on behalf of our program, which provides career technical education for 1,000 Berkeley High students. We have had difficulty attracting teachers, and career technical education requires teachers who have expertise in the field, industry experience, because they do not live in Berkeley and they have to commute long distances for a single class or 2 classes, and the pay is de minimis, to say the least. The question of housing is a critical issue for attracting and keeping younger faculty in the school district. People who come here are entering into the salary schedule, who have families, are confronted with the housing crisis, healthcare costs, and we lose these people. These are the future of education here. And we're losing them because we cannot provide affordable housing. We've been talking about this issue inside the district since 2017. It is finally coming to fruition with the support of BeHome Berkeley and the city, and your participation, which I'm grateful for. But I want you to know that this is a crisis facing the school district that we cannot ignore. So I urge you to take action on this and support what the mayor is trying to do in collaboration with the school district. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment for the general public comment session? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 5, discussion and possible action to appoint a subcommittee. So I'm going to move that first actually for this over.
Yeah, so the first item on the list is to create a subcommittee for 1281 University Avenue. The hack may recall, but we have some new members as well. So last year, the city was instructed by council to release an RFP at council's direction to serve extremely low income households with a focus on homeless services. And that was to build new construction on a site at 1281 University Avenue. The site is a vacant lot. It formed about 3,600 square feet. It's adjacent to Berkeley Way Mini Park, and it was formerly home to the Kenny Cottage, which was a historic structure that's since been relocated. The city received 2 proposals, and they worked with HAC to review the applications and make recommendations. They ultimately selected RCD's proposal to provide 16 units of homeless housing and services and make that recommendation to council. The next step was council approved negotiating with RCD for development and disposition of the site, but RCD ultimately notified the city that they were unable to secure the proper financial resources that would be necessary to complete the project in a timely way, and they withdrew from the process. So now we're returning to HAC, and we're asking you all to form a subcommittee to review and make a recommendation to council about the future of the site and what the options for what the best use could be.
So of course it was no secret back then that I worked at RCD and on that project. Now that I no longer do, and it sounds like they dropped out of the entire process, so they're not going to be a developer for the site.
We can't. I mean, I can't say that. It ultimately, under the previous iteration of the RFP, they deemed it was not financially feasible. But we're asking you more to determine, what the next steps for the site would be.
Do I still have to recuse myself?
That's ultimately at your discretion, but I mean, I don't see a conflict.
Neither do I. All right.
What is the anticipated period of time over which this subcommittee will be meeting?
You know, I think it's a priority for the city to move this forward as quickly as possible. I'll say that, but I would leave that at your discretion for as much time as you need.
Commissioner Sutton Weisberg, and then
I was just going to say that I would be interested in being on the committee.
I would be interested in as well.
So would I. I've sit out all this time.
I would as well, and I have a question of whether staff will be at these meetings, is it sort of interactive that way?
Yeah, we could be, so this isn't, to be clear, the first iteration was the city released an RFP, and it was more similar to the Housing Trust Fund Subcommittee, where staff reviewed the application, did technical analysis, and worked with the committee to review the applications. So at this preliminary stage, this would be more an independent subcommittee at your discretion to determine best uses for the site. So, that could be to consider, you can make a recommendation to sell it for Housing Trust Fund revenue, to issue a new RFP, to negotiate with the other bidder who ultimately wasn't selected in favor of RFP, to go through options like that. So we can be definitely more assistance than, because we have the technical answers for the questions, but I don't see it as a typical Housing Trust Fund type subcommittee at this point in time.
So, just at this stage, it seems like we have plenty of interest in it, so I think what we probably should work on doing is maybe fleshing out what the charge of this committee would look like and the timeline for it that we're required when we make ad hoc committees. So if anyone has any suggestions as to that, and if anyone else is interested in serving, then we also will probably have to do a more involved vote.
Yeah, so I would want to also volunteer to serve, and whatever it's worth, this is in the district of the council person that appointed me, and I would like to be on.
I think that's a, sure.
I was just gonna say, in terms of charge, I think that's kind of laid out in that.
Oh, you're right.
Timeline,
Timeline.
2 months.
We'll report back in 2 months.
That sounds reasonable.
So I would make a motion actually for following the recommendation in the packet and then a timeline of 2 months. And I think we should have a bit of deference to people who are actually representing the districts that the projects are in. So support Mr. Sharenko being on it. And then maybe a voting process of a plurality vote for the commission.
Second.
There's been a second and a motion. So we'll go to discussion. Is there any other ideas for how we should proceed process-wise?
My only thought is there's some people who are on lots of subcommittees and some people who are on very few. So we might want to consider that as a factor to get more people involved in the subcommittees.
Yeah. So of all the people who are,
I think that's a great idea. I would propose maybe everyone who's interested, giving them the opportunity to give a short pitch. I believe there are some subcommittees that, there's one that I'm on that will be adjourned soon or sunsetted. And so, but I agree with the overarching goal of ensuring equity across the markets.
So should the pitch making begin?
I think that was it.
Start. Can you go around? As I actually have experience trying to pencil a project on this site and analyze its utility, I feel like that I have a lot more familiarity with the lot and parcel than other people here. Additionally, all the subcommittees I've been on have sunsetted, so I don't feel on any at the moment.
My pitch is that my council person appointed me, it's in her district. I know she's very interested in making use of this land.
Echoing that, I live in the district. I live just a few blocks from the subject site. I did have an opportunity to participate in the previous iteration of the subcommittee. I thought we had a really good collaborative effort and came with a strong recommendation that was ultimately approved by the council. I'm looking forward to doing that again, and I am a little bit familiar with, we'll see what happens with the RFP, but some of the interest that has been expressed on the site and from
It's too tiny. So Commissioner Sunday.
Well, I guess to speak to who we represent, I'm here representing the mayor, which is for the whole city, and we'll give it perspective. Looking at, you know, from every aspect. I am not presently on any committees because the one that I was appointed to is over. And I also have been a housing attorney for 17 years. So I have a lot of experience with housing in general, whether it's tenant protection, preservation, or production. And I'm presently on the boards of 2 different organizations that provide, one provides production of senior housing, and one that actually, I'm on the board of Strawberry Creek Lodge, and that, which is also in the district, so I think I can, and right near there, actually.
Well, it is a very small parcel, and we're in a homeless emergency. Our housing funds are extremely limited, so in terms of what we can leverage there, we have some difficulties. In my district, we have at least one agency that works with homeless women and families that has had a long-standing interest in finding a site appropriate to put up some emergency flyweight expense, quickly built, sort of tiny homes, structures and things like that. It seems like in the short run, regardless of its longer term disposition, an excellent use for the site, and whether it's that particular agency or another, I'd like to meet with them to make a pitch for something along those lines.
Procedurally.
One more comment. Are we gonna, max is 4 for subcommittee?
Yeah.
So I guess there is interest for that. I think that's a little wonky and large for subcommittee, is my personal opinion, but I'll leave that at your discretion.
It's actually commission's discretion. But process-wise, it may make more sense for us to either give like 2 votes to everyone or something, just because there's a lot of like, just mathematically sorting it out.
Makes sense to me. I'll start.
Okay.
Wait, right?
No, I'm down. Let's go.
And we're all voting for 2 people?
Yes.
Oh,
Wait.
wait. For 2.
And who are, okay, fine, sure. Okay.
Just for the sake of
Okay,
moving
Daryl's
forward.
making things happen, fine.
What did you say, Joe?
I was gonna get started.
Oh, I thought you said you were voting, and I was like, I didn't hear anything.
Wait, I am voting right now. So obviously Alex should be on it, and I would also choose the tie between Leia and Igor.
Can't go wrong either way.
What you said you worked with some housing providers, so I'll choose. Is it pronounced Leia?
Leah.
Leah, right? Thank you.
I'll vote for myself and Igor.
You can vote for yourself.
Yeah, I definitely can vote for myself.
Oh,
I don't know why you didn't.
I thought you could vote for others. It's so
Sorry.
senseless.
Rules never sit.
I'll vote for Commissioner Sharango and Commissioner Simon Weisberg.
I'll vote for Alex, because he's a newcomer, and Igor, because it's his district.
We only get to choose 2.
Sure.
I would vote for myself and Alex.
Leah knows.
Abstain.
Do you have
I totally did.
Now we get rid of some, and then there's still some more that
a?
we would vote for.
Elimination.
I totally messed up my calendar. Doing all that.
Do you want to?
Reiterate it one more time, sorry about that.
Maybe staff took it down.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, never mind.
That's,
I think it's 6 for
Has everyone
Commissioner
voted?
Sharango.
Igor, Commissioner Trego was supposed to vote.
Not
Yeah.
voted yet. I will vote for Alex and myself.
Okay.
I'm actually that's a weird tie.
So it looks like 7 votes for Commissioner Sharango, 3 for Commissioner Trego, and 4 for Commissioner Simon Weisberg.
So we need 4 people.
There can be
Oh, it
4.
can be 4,
Yeah.
but what's the who got after that?
Yeah, I'd
That's it.
like to
Okay.
make a motion to, well, wait, Daryl, did you vote for yourself?
No, dude, I wasted it on Alex.
Wasted it.
Shot yourself.
I I will make a motion to designate a subcommittee with all the provisions previously discussed and sunset date, which would include Leah, Daryl, Alex, and myself.
Second.
Is there a motion and second?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the motion.
The exact same thing we just did, but adding you to be part of the commission.
Oh, like you should have done from the start.
Democracy, man.
So is there any other discussion on that motion? Any substitute motions or anything? Seeing none, we'll just go to a vote. We need a roll call for this one.
It might be easier. Let's go through real quick. Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Lord,
Abstain.
Owens,
Yes.
Sergeant, not here. Sharenko,
Yes.
Simon Weisberg,
Yes.
Tregu,
Yes.
Wolf,
Yes.
Wright.
Here, yes.
Motion passed.
Well, I think you said here earlier, so.
Fair enough.
Did Worthington come back or is that missing?
No, it's just not updated.
Oh, okay.
All right, so with that, the other discussion item, I believe, was for the Housing Trust Fund as a subcommittee as well, taking additional members for that committee. And I would like to offer that if anyone would like to take my spot on it, I'm happy to toss that into the mix.
Who's on it now?
Right now, it's me and Nico.
Don't leave, then we have to appoint even more people.
Well, if someone wants to take the spot, I'm saying.
I would be interested.
Now it's like an opportune time.
Well, it's not going in the Housing Trust Fund.
Oh, right, it's his own committee. Oh, whatever.
Well, wait, can I ask a question of staff? What are some of, I mean, I thought we were pretty much done with our docket. Is there something forthcoming that?
Nothing imminently. We accept pre-development loans over the counter. So if, for example, we had received a pre-development loan, it would go to the Housing Trust Fund Subcommittee for review before coming to that.
So then let's start. I mean, if there's nothing happening in May, do you want to stay on? I mean. It's weird. I mean, it's just that I feel like I'm trying to get on, because I'm not on, I feel like as a commission, I'm supposed to be on committees, but if it doesn't make sense to sign up for ones that aren't gonna do any work, because I should be doing work, so.
I think this one is helpful because it's like very specific projects and it usually gets to be more of an involved discussion. I think it's helpful to have like people to turn to when it's needed and have a like decent number of people be on it. So I think if you're wanting to do it, you should definitely participate in it.
Can I make a motion?
So I'll make a motion to add Leah to the Housing Trust, Leah Simon Weisberg to the Housing Trust Fund Subcommittee. Are there any other people who'd like to be part of this?
Can I nominate Commissioner White? if
I was
you
about to
would?
say, yeah, I was trying to ask you earlier, what does it do exactly?
So it approves, city staff.
So it is usually associated with particular projects, and we have pre-development loan or development loan requests. Staff do an analysis, and then we take it to the Housing Trust Fund Subcommittee for review, and then they make a recommendation to the HAC. Also, if we have a request for proposals, the subcommittee will weigh in on priorities for that RFP.
Yeah.
So Commissioner, you had a motion already.
Yeah, I'd like to move to add Commissioner Simon Weisberg and White to the HDF subcommittee.
I'll second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote by roll call.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Lord,
Abstain.
Owens,
Yes.
Sharenko,
Yes.
Simon Weisberg,
Yes.
Tregu,
Yes.
Wolf,
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Motion passes.
I have one quick thing about subcommittees real fast. All right, I want to just, if we turn to page 3 of our agenda packet, you'll see that there are 2 committees I want to just mention briefly. The Student Housing Committee is still here, due to expire June 30th. It was really Matt Lewis, right?
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah, his energy about this, and for me, I think either has to be taken over by another student who has got this energy for it, or we might want to disband it. Just a thought. I don't think we need to make a decision today, but give it some thought, because right now it's a dormant subcommittee.
Especially since Upper Hearst is happening, so you think it'd be relevant right now.
Yes. What? No. I'm happy to say I'm just agreeing with
No, but were you
All
gonna
the-
nominate him?
Oh.
He's on there.
Yeah, I'm already on
Oh,
it. I think the only person on it, correct? No, Mary.
No, Mary's on
But I'm on it
Still
too, but I'm not.
Evan, yeah, you're not.
It's a,
Sorry.
it's a pointless subcommittee, it's under the UC jurisdiction, right?
Excuse me, Chair, we actually had a public comment card for
Oh, you're so right.
item 5. So I just wanted to make sure we have time for that.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
just kidding.
I don't even think you can do the other votes we just did without putting on it first, right?
No, you were here, I just was looking.
Yes, if we should still be public comments there.
No, I mean, we definitely have to do the public comment, I think. My question is that invalidate the vote we just took, and we didn't do that. Yeah.
I would post public comment and I'll look that up to confirm.
I feel like we do have to do that.
Okay. It would be best practice, I'd say, for sure.
Darren?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So that you may have to. Again, this is very brief, and it's regarding 5A, for 1281 University Avenue. As mentioned by staff, there were 2 proposals, RCD and Open Door. RCD was selected and but has been withdrawn. Open Door's architect has approached my organization, which is Housing Consortium of the East Bay. And with Open Door's approval, we would like to have an opportunity to restructure the program to 100% affordable with limited changes to design. Program would be for 24 co-living suites for transition-age youth. The co-living model increases the housing community and peer support. It also maximizes utility of the site and addresses the housing need of transition-age youth in Berkeley, as mentioned by Commissioner Lord, that we're in a terrible crisis right now. This is one population that would benefit greatly. The only reason I came to make comment was as you guys are deliberating and going back to this subcommittee, to potentially give Open Doors proposal another look and accept Open Doors and HCB's approach to retool the model and programming and potentially save this process some time while also sticking to your original RFP and looking at the other proposal. That's my point. And I hope that doesn't invalidate your votes.
It's more like a best practice, I think, so I just want to redo the votes again.
Yeah, we definitely need to redo the vote. That's
Yes, so I thought. So we can do it probably as one motion this time, just collectively appointing Commissioner Simon Weisberg and Commissioner Amir Wright to the Housing Trust Fund Subcommittee, and then Commissioners, who was it? Owens, Simon Weisberg, Sharenko, and Trego to the 1281 University Avenue Subcommittee.
Second.
Is there a motion and a second? Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll go to a roll call vote.
Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lord,
Abstain.
Owens,
Yes.
Sergeant Sharenko,
Yes.
Simon Weisberg,
Yes.
Tregu,
Yes.
Wolf,
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, one more quick thing, is we need to extend one of the subcommittees in terms of the termination date. So back to that same page 3 in the agenda packet. Right now, the biannual housing report policy subcommittee expires at the end of this month, and we're not gonna be done with what we're doing. So just to be on the safe side, I'd like to extend it to June 30th.
Question for staff, are we able to take action on this since it's not explicitly listed as a subcommittee?
I think discussion and appointments of subcommittees as a general item should be acceptable, so I think it should be okay.
Okay.
So I'm just moving that we extend the date 2 more months to June 30th, not changing the composition of anything.
Okay, then I'll second that. Can I suggest an amendment that you will hopefully be friendly to? As much as I would love for smoke-free housing to be done tonight, and maybe it will, to be prudent, we may want to extend that by 1 month.
So 2 of them will be
Let's
extended.
just say both of them to
To
June
June
30th.
30th.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Commissioner
Okay,
Simon
well, that
Weisberg.
doesn't obligate us to.
I just wondered if you could take a minute to talk a little bit about what the biannual housing policy report is. for those of us that are new.
But
mean,
aren't we going out of order in terms of the agenda, because that is agendized?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mary.
Oh,
I-
to
when
talk
we
about it?
Yeah, when we discussed this,
Oh, okay, I mean, that's
Earlier.
fine, I just, for me to vote, I feel like I need to know what.
yeah, so when we discussed it earlier, I said it was okay because we have it as discussion and possible action, later in the agenda. And so I recommend approving it at that time,
Okay,
to be.
so I'll have to remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
It's on the agenda and we'll discuss it.
yeah, I would appreciate it, so,
Just to answer your question though, it's based on a measure you wanted provided that it gave a specific charge to the Housing Advisory Commission that will report annually about policies and programs for preserving housing and something else.
if we're gonna vote at the end, that's fine, I just,
So we're
You want me to
done
vote
with
on it?
agenda item number 5, I believe.
Point of information, what are we doing about the student housing subcommittee? Do we wanna discuss, take the time to discuss that later, figure it out now, what do we? I don't know.
I kind of agree with Commissioner Ward's assessment of it, so it's pretty much up to any student members who'd like to lead the charge on it.
The student member would
You're
fine
not in the room.
sunsetting.
Say again?
I'm fine ending it.
Yeah. It'll just sunset on its own if we don't do it.
Do we need to vote on the motion to expand the subcommittees?
I hope we're
If you're
doing
going
that
to
later.
smoking, we need to do that when we get to it.
Later,
I'll be happy.
later on the agenda, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
well, I would move to have the student housing, extended.
Second.
And the biennial, right?
Well, I think that
Oh, that's
we
later.
discuss it
Okay.
at the.
I was just trying to be more efficient
I
and
think
slow
part
it
of
down.
the challenge is that we're worried about the student one not being actually attended, and I think that we could just make that be an item for next month's meeting. And
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Can we do that?
yeah, sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
we're gonna put it on next month's agenda.
Okay, so with that, I think that takes us into item number 6, and this time I will remember to do public comment beforehand. So with that, are there any people here to speak on, well, it's just a presentation, I guess, I'll let you public comment presentation.
Take that for 7.
Yeah. Although, we did have speaker cards filled out for number 6, though, so.
Don't forget
So I have Stephanie Allen, and then I'll say it. It's in my notes too. What's wrong with me today? Would you like to speak before?
Yeah, I'm Alexander Day, for number 6. Hi folks, how you doing? Is the timer ready to go?
Yeah, good morning.
All right, cool. So this time my name is Alexander Day. I'm a teacher at Berkeley High, a member of the Berkeley Federation of Teachers Executive Board, and site rep for the Universal 9th Grade program at Berkeley High School. I've taught for 3 years, all of which have been at Berkeley High School, and I'm also an alum of the Berkeley Public Schools, Berkeley High class of 2006. All right, I'm here today to strongly encourage the Berkeley Housing Commission to approve recommendation to allocate $150,000 for initial evaluation and planning of BUSD employee housing. Being in my 3rd year of teaching and having lived in Berkeley and then Oakland since 2009 when I came back from college, I know the extraordinary pressures that this rental and housing market puts on people. The uncertainty of current and future housing situations, can lead people to question the viability of being an educator in this time and place. The stark reality of instability has made an already demanding and undercompensated profession even more unsustainable. Without robust and sustained investment in BUSD employee housing and other solutions, how can we expect to recruit and retain a staff of educators that is diverse, multi-generational, and highly trained? Already, my classified and certificated colleagues who are not already well established in their housing have to deal with long commutes, make difficult compromises, and have multiple jobs, not just a second job, multiple jobs to make ends meet. With no end in sight to the housing crisis or the underinvestment in K-12 education, we, the educators of Berkeley, members of BFT and BCCE, our classified colleagues, need strong acts of solidarity from the city of Berkeley. I hope that this investment in the evaluation and planning of the BUSD housing, employee housing, can be the first of such actions. Thank you.
Is there any additional comment for agenda item number 6?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of teachers, but I'm really not a fan of housing projects that are restricted to one small part of the workforce, that all of whom feel these pressures. I mean, you don't disrespect, but I see this happening all over Berkeley. What happens if they lose their job? To me, you know, we need affordable housing and low-income housing so bad that when I see Berkeley's resources headed in this unique direction, I just feel as though someone has to speak up for these pressures being illustrated so well, affecting a much larger workforce than that single one. Thanks.
If there's no more public comment, is there any more? And we'll turn over to the actual presentation. I'll give it over to, please, yeah, David.
Actually, I'm going to turn it over to.
Should we turn off the lights?
We get lights.
So, I'm Julie Sinai.
I think it was 7. Okay.
All right, you ready to go?
Yep.
I'm Julie Sinai, School Board Director for Berkeley Unified School District. I want to thank you all again for hearing this item, and I want to thank Chairperson Johnson and Commissioner Sharenko and Tregu for co-sponsoring the item that's before you tonight. I was here at last month, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but as you know, Berkeley Unified, in partnership with Mayor Adedin, is looking at partnering to develop a plan to build workforce housing for Berkeley educators on Berkeley Unified School District property. Our request is $150,000 to do the pre-development and the planning that we need to do in order to create 80 to 110 or so units of workforce housing. I understand in the public comment and what you guys, just to give you a quick overview of what we hear at every single board meeting is a host of teachers and classified staff who are coming forward with their stories of not only issues around meeting fair and competitive compensation, but even with the best compensation packet, their inability to afford to live in our community. Our entry-level teachers make $48,000 a year. Our highest paid teacher makes $90,000 a year. It is very hard to even get a 2-bedroom apartment, which costs about $3,000 a month in this community. So we're here to give you a brief presentation, but I really want to reiterate, our Berkeley educators work with 10,000 Berkeley students. Having the level of turnover and instability affects all of our families. It doesn't just affect the workforce, it affects the families and the children that are in the classroom. So we appreciate your attention. What I said at the last meeting is that when we came forward, we would actually have a little bit more detail about what we're looking for to be able to do with our planning. And I just want to let you know that what the planning will do is allow us to evaluate 2 of the 4 sites that are available for district housing and recommend 1 site to the school board for development and pre-development, or for pre-development. It'll evaluate the housing, the site itself, what it would take, what the zoning issues are, what the envelope is, etc. We will estimate the cost for construction and the capacity. We will develop conceptual financing model based on the proposed development. We'll define the operating and property governance. That all needs to get figured out. We will define the community engagement process and finally be able to prepare an RFP for the property development. Again, I said at the last meeting that we just cut $2 million out of our general fund. This is not something that we can pay for out of our general fund, and our capital funding does not allow for us to develop any kind of plans around housing because, as you know, bond funding is very specific to what the voters approved. So we have David Mayer here from BeHome who's going to give a brief presentation with John Police, who is our district facilities manager and who will be the lead on developing the RFP.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, my name's David Mayer, and I'm one of the members of BeHome. Thank you for having us here to talk about this important issue. I have been hearing for the last 2 years of the continued articulation by classified and certificated employees of BUSD, the challenges they're facing with compensation generally and specifically with the ability to afford housing, which is what has inspired me and the fellow members of BeHome to be active in our community. BeHome, which stands for Berkeley Housing Opportunities for Municipal Employees, organized nearly 2 years ago. We are a community of minded people that came together from our care and concern about the changing diversity and the migration of vastly important members of our community. People that were leaving due to the lack of affordability. Of chief concern was the plight and the flight of our valued public servants. BeHome's members include Berkeley residents, business owners, BUSD parents, BUSD graduates, marketing executives, labor organizers, builders, and administrators with relative business and educational background, all committed to realize workforce housing now. BeHome's model is to evaluate through the process land and planning and financing, development and management elements in order to try to facilitate and connect the resources that are existing in our community and also in our state and national level in order to realize workforce housing for municipal employees. Speaking to one of the points that in public comment we heard, as well as Director Sinai mentioned, is the issue of affordability. This graphic shows that based on AMI indices, that 120% of AMI could possibly afford and find housing somewhere within a commute distance of approximately an hour. At 100%, we're looking at an hour and a half if you look at these rings, and this is in each direction, which means our educators are driving an hour and a half each way, coming to work tired, going home tired, and having to deal with home issues as well as coming into the classroom in a compromised state. When we look at 80% or below, you can see they're having to drive as far as 2 hours away just to get to work in Berkeley. This is untenable to maintain a quality education environment for our students and for our community. Berkeley BeHome's efforts today have included research, and we've involved members of legislation, economists, looked at regulation through legal efforts. We've collaborated with affordable housing experts, educator housing projects that have already started or have been looked at, and then housing developers within our own community who have stepped up and volunteered to give us and share with us their ideas. We've had one-on-one meetings with BUSD members, with city council members, with members here of the HAC, as well as members of our own community. The mayor has supported this program, as you already know, as do most of the city council members. We've also met with our state representatives because we have a crisis at hand. We've held two public working or invited working sessions where we've involved members of the community as well as public finance people, BUSD stakeholders, and community experts, all to try to get our arms around how to move this forward as quickly as possible. One of the things that became clear through the process by BUSD is that they have very, very limited resources to put into play in order to develop housing for their employees. This is when BeHome stepped in. We felt as a community there's a wealth of intelligence and experience that could be brought to bear to help show a path to BUSD so they could actualize workforce housing. With that in mind, one of the key elements that was interrupting the process of progress was that how does this get financed? So I'm going to do a quick model of how this all gets financed. And one of the things that's unique is educator housing has special mechanisms that are not available necessarily to all other forms of affordable housing. So this model basically shows you have to balance your scales. Special programs that are available to educator workforce housing that our model follows include obviously the use of land, which BUSD will be providing at no cost or a cost of $1 for a long-term lease. Land is an extremely valuable resource in this community, and that contribution is substantial in creating affordable housing. Unlike some housing projects which are dealing with low, very low, or maybe no income tenants, this is dealing with tenants who do have income, and therefore rents can be leveraged in order to create a debt structure that can afford the building of housing. Additionally, through legislation known as the Leno Law, or SB 1413, tax credits are available to the development of educator workforce housing. So these are three major building blocks that allow this project to move forward, which leaves a gap. And it's not a huge gap, but it is a gap. And this is where the city's involvement may come into play. One of the options that we've looked at in modeling this is the possibility of using market rate units. We've also looked at facilities bonds. There is Measure O, Measure U, housing trust funds that may come into play, developer fees, which you're all familiar with, and then there may be state monies. As Director Sinai already identified, some districts have put forth some of their general funds in order to subsidize the workforce housing. BUSD is clearly not going to do that. And with that in mind, we've had to identify all these other sources, which include those that are listed. And with that financing in place, we then had to look at the locations, and I'm going to turn this over to John Calise, who will talk about the sites which are in your packet.
Thank you, David. So, good evening. My name is John Calise. I'm the Executive Director of Facilities for Berkeley Unified. So, as David and Director Sinai have indicated, we are beginning to look at our sites right now, and currently the district has been able to identify 4 potential sites. But that being said, it's, and we'll go over what those are, the first of which is 1222 West University Avenue, which is the field space that's connected to the West Campus. We have the current maintenance facility, which is 1720 Oregon Street, as well as 1707 Russell Street. The Berkeley Adult School, and we're not talking about necessarily the adult school proper, but perhaps the parking area of the adult school at 1701 San Pablo, and then Berkeley High Tennis Courts at 2309 Milvia Street, which currently serves as about 135 staff parking spaces. So first, I want to be very clear, the order that these are written are they're not in any specific order. We're not trying to make a recommendation. Ultimately, what we've been able to do is identify that we have these 4 potential sites, and what we're looking to do now is to move further into the pre-development phase with your help and actually be able to narrow that down to 2 and ultimately 1. There's zoning challenges that we have to look at. There's going to be capacity and yield challenges. Obviously, there's parking, there's transportation, and so on and so forth. So this is where we are right now. We've been able to find those, and we're looking now to try to narrow this down. So I will pass this back to Director Sinai, who I believe is going to finish us off this evening.
So our timeline, I listed what our planning deliverables are. I think we can turn the lights on now. Is that it? That's it? Yeah, and so, wake up now. And we'll be discussing the process for narrowing the sites at our April 10th school board meeting. And I just want to demonstrate within that we're actively moving forward around doing this. And the timing issue is that we would like to be ready with an RFP for the property by the fall. In order to do that, we need to really get the planning and pre-development happening now, as soon as possible. So we've already prepared for an RFP that we can let. We're just moving forward with the process and hope that in partnership with the city, with the support of the HAC, that we can take this recommendation to the city council and move forward on the grant. Thank you.
All right. I will try to monitor a key for discussion as well, or actually no, we're not on that agenda yet. So it's just a presentation. So next we'll do public comment prior to the actual item number 7. Are there any additional public comments on item number 7? So this is the actual proposal. Seeing none, I saw Commissioner Simon Weisberg in the queue. I'm going to open it up since I drafted the thing, and then I'll bring in all the comments. So just want to take note of the first real quickly. So Commissioner Simon Weisberg, then Wolf, then Sharanko, and Trisha. And okay. I'm just going to be super brief, because I think all the points have sort of been reiterated already. In terms of the bigger picture, I think that I'm just going to read what I wrote actually. So, as the child of an educator, I know the incredible amount of work, energy, and passion each of you put into your work every day. Our educators are the vanguard of any progressive future we can ever hope to have. At the end of the day, anything we're fighting for is going to require a next generation that's fighting for it as well. And so I think that's, to me, part of the reason why this particular proposal is so important. But ultimately, I think there's a bigger backdrop of this idea that in the city of Berkeley and in the U.S. as a whole, we don't really have public housing as widely available as we really should to all the different entities that deserve it or need it. And I think that right now, this is an opportunity, given state laws and state legislation, for something that we as a city can invest in. I think that my ultimate hope is that it's broadened out to not just be for educators, that it's broadened out to other municipal employees, that it's broadened out to really everyone that lives within our society. But right now, we have an opportunity, given state law, to make a specific action, and we have an opportunity, given the property that the USD holds, to make a specific action. And so with that, that's kind of the main place that I'm coming from with this item, and I think it's a really, really cool opportunity. So with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Simon Westbrook.
Well, to start, I am very clearly in support of us providing the financing. I mean, it's really a drop in the bucket if it can lead to, I think it was 180 units? Did I make
Depends on
that?
staff, so not 180, probably 110.
Okay.
110
I was dreaming.
might be the cap.
But yeah. But in light of that, I mean, I think I've shared before that my 10-year-old is in 4th grade at Malcolm X, and as my day job, I'm a tenant attorney, and I would say on a monthly basis, I'm providing legal services to teachers and staff. So my daughter has had at least 1 to 2 families a year who are homeless at some point in the year. So the crisis is obviously impacting the schools, from the teachers to the students. So obviously it's needed. I do want to, well, I just note a couple of things. One is that teachers are often parents, and I would say that the majority of teachers who've reached out to me around a housing crisis, it's been in relationship to their children. One where the landlord told them that now that they're pregnant, that once their baby was born, that they couldn't live there anymore. And so I just want to highlight that when you're building this, to take into consideration that it's very likely that these folks are going to be parents and that they will need places for their kids to play, and that so much of the new construction tends to be very geared towards the idea that, you know, people just sleep at their house. And so to keep that in mind. You know, I also have been, in the teachers union in the state of California has not been particularly active in the housing crisis, and I would ask that the union, like when we've had rent control fights to get rid of Costa-Hawkins, which are all things that are contributing, the teachers union has been totally silent. So I really hope that the teachers union will get involved in these other pieces that are preventing it, because you can't really lose a fight if the teachers are on your side. So I hope you join the tenant community. I know the tenant advocates went out for the Oakland teachers in the union, with the strike, and I invite you all to join the tenant movement, so we can address this housing crisis. The unions also historically built housing. There's all this great co-op housing in San Francisco that were built by the dock workers. And I think that's a great model, and I would hope you would look at, that was done. I understand some of the financing came from investment of the retirement funds, because they were essentially loans. And, it's beautiful housing, lots of people want to live there. And that kind of connects to, I am concerned about what is it going to mean to create housing that's connected to people's jobs, just in the same way our healthcare model in the United States fails us, and all those countries across the Atlantic where people are happy, their healthcare is not connected to their employment. And so I know that when I, 2 years ago, had talked to some of the union staff at Malcolm X, they were uninterested in having teacher housing because of this fear of, like, how do you go on strike if they can evict you from your house? So I just think that we need to really understand in long term to support how to, and I'm not saying that their position is that way anymore, but there needs to be stability for the workers who are in that housing, and so I want to know kind of what the strategy is to do that. And then my last point is that I know that Cal, is obviously having the same struggle to have teachers there. And I know that one of the ways that they help people stay is that they provide, low interest loans with very little down payment. And I know that for many folks, we pay for rent more than a mortgage. And if FHA loans were viable in the city, people could buy houses. And so I think also the district looking at ways to provide low-income loans would also be another piece to this pie. And so I hope you use all 4 sites also.
So next, Commissioner Wolf, coming to you, then Commissioner Schrenko, and Commissioner Trey.
Okay, I tried to actually write these down. First, I want to start with something Leah said sort of towards the end, and that is, I don't know what happens if there's turnover, if you do leave employment with the BUSD and you're living in the apartment, so I would like that clarified. Number 2, I'm assuming this is all rental, but because nothing in it implies that it wouldn't be all rental. 3, I know that our report from our commissioners mentioned, we could change the guidelines for U1 funds. No, those were voted in. You can't go above 80%. I went ahead and checked again the ballot language. So when we do revise this memo, take out all references to U1. O is fine, we have to be a little patient to get the bond money, but O is fine. Number 4, I would vote for the school district proposing the project that would yield the greatest number of units. It's a lot of work to do this, so get as many as you can, and I would really strongly advise that. And another final point is, I know those tennis courts, the parking lot, whatever you want to call them, has been a plague. I would not recommend that site. It's a very tight site. I don't know where the faculty who's now parking there is going to park. People are not all transit oriented, riding their bikes, and I guess if I were my choice, I would put the tennis courts at the very bottom of my 4 options. And I know you said you're going to look at all 4, but one thing you didn't address though is what, if you have a maintenance facility right now, is it being used as for maintenance? And if it is, what's your option for your off-site? So these sites all have a lot of follow-up work, and I don't know if that's part of the pre-development.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So next, thank you, Commissioner Schrenko, then Commissioner Trey, then Commissioner Lord.
Great. So I want to start by thanking Chair Johnson for doing the heavy lifting of writing this, and for Chair Jacob of co-sponsoring it myself. I think that in a better world, we have a functioning housing market, and we have teachers that were paid commensurate with the value they have in society, that we don't live in that world. And so I think we have to have non-perfect solutions. And I think this is a non-perfect solution, but I think it's a really important bulwark between teachers who are incredibly valuable to Berkeley, and I would say essential to our viability as a city, economic travesty is probably not overstating it. So I think there are legitimate logistic concerns have been raised. In a better world, I agree with you. We wouldn't have health care that was not connected to our job. We would have housing that was not connected with our job. And I think we should be hesitant moving towards that. But once again, I think that the situation is dire enough that an experiment like this is necessary. I think that we've gotten to a tipping point where we're going to really struggle to run the school program, and I think this is the type of action, the scale of action that's commensurate with that problem at this point. But I agree with a lot of these points that have been made, and I think that there's going to have to be some difficult discussions about how to structure this so that these logistic points are taken care of. I think I won't try to go through all of them, but one specific point I think was mentioned about the relationship between BUSD having more control over teachers. I think almost certainly this would be managed by a nonprofit. There would be a third-party entity in between BUSD and teachers. So I don't foresee that being a significant issue. But again, these are things that are going to have to be worked out. I'm gonna end my comments with actually making a motion to approve this recommendation to council with the only change as written, striking any mention of U1 based on your reading of the language.
Second. There's been a second from, who really wants a second? Go for it.
It's up to you guys.
Well, I'll second, but I'd like to make one little other suggestion.
I got options though, so no, let's hear it.
That the school district be encouraged to build as many units as possible.
Oh, I'm friendly to that amendment.
I'll be adding to that when my comment comes up.
Okay, and so,
That's the sentence. Yeah.
okay, sure.
So, Commissioner Trego is next.
Well, first of all, I wanted to also start out by thanking this group. I have seen the incredible amounts of work and countless hours that you collectively put into this effort over a number of years now. And just as it is, the housing affordability crisis is becoming more tragic every year, but also I'm getting very excited to see this effort come closer to going across the finish line and coming to fruition. I too wanted to thank Commissioners Johnson and Shavenko, and in particular Chair Johnson for putting much of this together. Thank you to Director Sinai for working with us, having these conversations over a number of months. You know, I can tell you from personal experience that commuting out into the burbs every single day sucks. And you know what sucks even more? Having to commute the other way. I see how much traffic there is. I completely can relate to the points that you brought up. It can take 1.5 to 2 hours in going in each direction, which is a terrible consumption of greenhouse gas emissions, not to mention an erosion of the quality of life. And for a profession that contributes so much to our community, it really, I would agree that it is a travesty, and I would use stronger language than that. As far as, you know, I just, I also have experience, well, we don't have kids in the schools right now. Mortessa and I do hope to start a family soon, and we will be in the USD schools. It was incredibly heart-wrenching to me. As some of you know, I spent the past 8 months knocking on many doors, and many teachers, parents of teachers, classified staff, other educators, and it was this consistent drumbeat of folks having to live with their parents, folks being priced out of Berkeley, folks having to decide between making a difference as part of their jobs of being an educator or classified staff, or having to find something that is a little closer to the only places where they can afford to live. So as such, I'm very, very motivated to support this. I do want to add to some of the comments that have been made. I do think that while Measure All funds should be considered for sure, I also know that $150,000 truly is a drop in the bucket, considering we have $135 million in revenue out of Measure All. But I did also want the city to seriously look at general funds as well, because even though $135 million in Measure O seems like a lot, we all know that there is such an unmet need across a number of different categories, and those do include extremely low income, very low income, and low income. I think there is a sweet spot in here where all of these criteria can be met, and all these groups can be funded. And it actually is unfortunate that we can't use U1 dollars for this because, but I do remember that is how the measure was written, and of course, that was before it became even more expensive to live in Berkeley, where you pretty much have to make 160% of every median income just to be able to stay afloat and live in the city, but this is where we are. I do agree with the comment of maximizing the number of units, but I also wanted to associate myself with Leah's comments about ensuring that at least some percentage of those units are family friendly, which means that they are going to have larger square footage for some of the units. And so I actually wanted to see if the maker of the motion and seconder would be friendly to including some language balancing the need for as many units as possible, but also having them be as family friendly as possible.
Totally accept it.
And lastly, I know you have a good process in place, and I'm excited to see which sites are selected. Personally, since I, at least for the time being, live right across the street from the San Pablo Avenue Opportunity site at the Berkeley Adult School, I would welcome as many units as possible of housing for educators and classified staff in that area. I think that lot lends itself very well to housing, but I look forward to seeing what the process unveils. And once again, thank you so much for bringing this forward tonight.
So I have Commissioner Lord, then Commissioner Wright, then Commissioner Owens, and myself.
Sure. I wonder if you would consider a friendly amendment. When it comes to mentioning potential sources of funding, to just simplify that and say, from appropriate sources. As you point out, it's a very small amount of money. I think that we're in the budget process right now, that probably, council will be able to do that, but information to do. My understanding about something like Measure O funds is that if council were to decide to do that, most likely what would happen is that it would be referred to the policy subcommittee and would have to wait until the panel of experts was formed and things. It's just easier to say, city, fund this. If you accept that as a friendly amendment, then I can support it.
I'm totally fine with that. I think you're 100% right that council is going to follow their own process to define that, so I'm happy being general. Sure.
I'm happy also to help you rewrite this. I have extra time and I can help take out all that.
Sure, I think most of these changes are pretty minimal at this point, but yes to all.
Was that the maker and seconder?
Yes.
Okay. So with all of that said, I thank you for the presentation. I actually liked quite a bit of what I heard. I'm also extremely supportive of what Ms. Denny was saying, that there's a danger here, a problem here, that we risk setting up the interests of the district or the teachers against the other residents of Berkeley. Some of the rhetoric, please don't take this the wrong way. One thing that you said that just like creeped me out was when you talked about very important members of our community.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you, one of the sites you're considering is that parcel between Oregon and Russell. Okay, this is sort of my neck of the woods. And if you know that neighborhood, and particularly if you can even sort of still see that area around Russell Street, that's a lower income community. It's rapidly gentrifying. There's already a lot of tension there and things like that. And I don't want either the message to be or the legal structure of this to be that we're saying, well, these families which have every much as right to the city as everyone else and who are just as important, that somehow we're not supporting the expansion, the sustenance of those communities in favor of trying to optimize the city workforce. So as you go through the finance stuff and the management stuff and the ownership model, I think there's real opportunities to work with the city to build some sort of system of housing where in kind for the land contribution, for example, that you have reserved units, that you achieve the effect that you need sort of in this crisis right now. But at the same time, in the long run, as the market changes and as maybe this crisis subsides in other ways, but there's still low income needs, that there's flexibility to use this publicly owned, hopefully publicly owned, property in flexible ways to adjust to evolving needs. So I think that's the best way to harmonize that. I think you heard earlier today that we have concerns about, Section 8, but the actual ordinance is a general ordinance that we don't discriminate in the city on the basis of sources of income. And there's a little bit of a contradiction, so I worry about that. As I said, I do support especially this pre-development phase. It's no problem. But I wanted to voice those concerns. And also, let me just say, I lost a pair of neighbors, one of whom was a extremely well-respected career middle school teacher, and his partner was also sort of affiliated, did some other things with the district. And it was in fact like housing costs that caused them to suddenly have to pull up stakes and abandon that career and move to a different state and things like that. So I see the problem, I've experienced it. Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Wright in the queue, then Commissioner Owens, then myself.
So all of my original comments were already said by other commissioners, so I just want to add in that I support the project in front of us, and just totally want to do what we can to make sure that teachers don't have these ridiculous commutes. These are things that like Commissioner Trakin was saying, affect quality of life, and we're talking about people spending more time commuting than they're spending at home with their families, or preparing meals, or doing whatever it is that they need to do outside of their job. So I just want to move forward with this as quickly and expediently as possible.
Commissioner Owens?
I graduated from BUSD in 2014, so obviously I don't need to run over how the housing crisis is bad. But my only point to add is that I don't want to see, first of all, the concept of teacher housing, I think sort of bothers me a bit because it's like dormitories for a very specific type of profession, and I don't know how I feel about that, but I do agree that city workers in general need to be housed because they need to run our city, whether it's sewer maintenance like my dad, or parking enforcement like my mom, or teachers like my teachers. So I did think that a program like prioritizing city employees for affordable housing in the lottery would have been an interesting idea, but I'm totally in support of this. I don't mind it. The only thing that I need to say though is that I don't want to see all the sites used. I want to see like one or two and extremely maximize density. I don't want, we have very, limited amount of land, and so as much as you can build, I don't think that multifamily units, 2-bedroom, 3 bedrooms, in any way conflicts with building densely.
I agree.
We can just keep building up, that's the limit. So we need to write that they need to maximize that density, because when we did it with the North Berkeley BART recommendation, they said they do that, and then all they're doing right now is talking about height. So again, we need the council to take it seriously. If a proposal goes to the council for West Campus, which I support, and I think is a very ideal place, West Campus and the adult school, really needs to be about how many units pencil. Not how tall is it and the setbacks and all that stuff. We have parks for a reason. Let's get these homes on these sites and not eat up our land.
So is that friendly amendment?
Yeah, friendly amendment, prioritize density on the site, as many units as we can.
So is it okay to phrase it as build to the maximum zoning envelope?
Or rezone it to build even more, as much as you need.
You're gonna start losing votes if you go in that direction.
Well, do we have a housing crisis or do we have an aesthetics crisis?
I don't think any of that's relevant in this moment right now because it's pre-development.
Okay, I'm just saying that's the problem.
Let's just leave that off. We're gonna leave that off.
I'm just saying that's what's gonna happen.
Okay. We're gonna okay, we'll have that debate some other time. We're gonna leave that
We'll
off.
be back. I'm sure we'll be back.
Can we call for the vote?
One last thing I want to add before we call for vote. Since I have myself in the queue. So the other thing I wanted to add is mainly just that we need to, I'd like to, as a friendly amendment, suggest that we also do a letter directly to the council, because I think there's coming up somehow in their agenda pretty soon. I think they need actually a letter of our recommendation prior to it being a council agenda. Otherwise, if we wait and don't do the letter, I think it'll get to that a little bit too late. So
I'm fine with that.
So simultaneously with the recommendation.
So it becomes a letter rather than as a formal recommendation.
I think they need both, so
Yeah.
I think it has to be both, but I think we do an informational letter letting them know that we did this. That'll just go to them as an information item, which is kind of the same as what our regular recommendations are anyway, but I think the letter gives them expediency.
Can I ask anything? Is it possible for us to share the letter with the PTA presidents of the different schools so that they can provide support?
Sure, I have no objections to that.
Does the district, would that be okay? I was attempt at being helpful.
Sure. Maybe just to clarify, we will also put whatever documentation that you do in our board packet for April 10th.
All right.
So we can share it that way as well.
And the last thing I wanted to kind of reiterate too is, again, the reason I mentioned this is particularly an opportunity is again because of SB 1413. Like, it's a specific law written at the state level that explicitly authorizes a particular type of housing. I think underlying we can have a conversation about what that looks like and is that the right model for it. To me, I think this is an opportunity in the moment. I think it's something that exists right now. Ultimately, I think we should be providing housing to everyone. As a matter of government practice, like everyone, housing is a human right, and everyone talks about that, but like, gotta put the money where the mouth is. I think with that, is there anything?
So is there a letter now that we're going to wordsmith, or just trust that the chair's gonna get the right language?
So, as I made the motion, my vision would be just to take the wording basically in the informational item and translate that to a letter based on the few friendly amendments we had. Does that sound reasonable? Okay.
Yeah, so to clarify, council can't take any action on a letter that we send. So they couldn't receive this letter and then go on and say, well, we're gonna provide this pre-development funding. You could send them something saying that this is important, they would note it in their packet. But they would actually, it wouldn't be until, and they may consider this before your recommendation gets there, which is, I think, what you're saying when you want the letter. But I just wanna make that clear that they wouldn't be able to vote to support your specific recommendation until it was actually acted.
But is it on the, my understanding was that it was coming before.
So,
Yeah.
Mayor Adegin wants to put this on the April 30th agenda because of the importance of timing. But he also wants to respect the role of the HAC. And so the recommendation was, you guys have your recommendation, but if you give correspondence that says you took action, then he at least knows that he's working in concert with the HACs.
Why don't we do both? Why don't we do a
Yeah, let's do both.
letter ASAP,
Let's do both.
and then revise this and let the commission see it one more time?
I don't feel the need the commission to see it again. I'm happy to chair and co-chair, writing the letter with the friendly amendments.
So that's the letter, I'm talking about the
I'm
recommendation.
talking about both. I don't need to see either. I'd say just, Chair, are you comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I would just say that we delegate to the chair to go through the letter and the, that it seems like there also needs to be a formal memorandum to the council.
So I drafted the item to
Yeah,
be
so
that
that can be,
memorandum.
yeah.
Yes, that's my vision.
We're on the same page.
I just have one more housekeeping item. Director Sinai, you said that you have a meeting on April 10th. Can we include as a friendly amendment in the motion just authorization to the chair that if there are any materials that he feels are ready to be presented at that meeting or prior to that meeting, to authorize, even if it's pre-decisional, but it reflects the will of tonight's vote, that can be shared.
I mean, that's
Just my role as the chair is representing
I
House.
was gonna say, that's at the chair's discretion to do that anyways. I don't think we need to include that as a friendly amendment, and I encourage either the chair or co-chair to do that as they see fit.
And you're welcome to come for public comment
Yeah.
and just make a statement.
But please note that only the chair can speak on behalf of the HAC.
Correct.
Right.
I'm, yeah.
But all of us can speak as individuals.
Is there any more discussion of?
It's so trivial. Commissioner Simon Weisberg, what entity is sending letters to the PTA?
I was asking that the letter that we send to council, that we CC it to the PTAs. Like there's a list of,
I'm not sure that we can do that. You could do that as an individual.
Well, the letter's gonna send a letter to the PTA. The letter's gonna get to the PTA one way or the other.
Yeah,
I don't feel the need for us
that's a
specifically
great-
to.
that's a
I think
good
it's a
thing.
great idea involving the PTA.
Yes.
I don't feel that we need to
well, I
specifically.
guess I was
send it.
asking the ESD if that would be helpful, or.
So I think the hack is advisory to the city council.
Yes, agreed.
So you can do your letter to the council, and if any of you so are inclined to, communicate with your colleagues on the PTA, I think you're welcome to, but I think officially, you're advisory to them.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying that I think that, I just know that, like, that is a group of people that is very active and complains a lot. And here's a thing that they can actually do, which is go to their council people and say, this is how we want you spending your money. And that in the next 2 weeks, it sounds like we have a letter that articulates the support, and that could be something. So I was saying, can we do that?
Well, it's public, so one of us.
Sure. I encourage us all as individuals to do that.
Okay. So,
I don't think I can.
I don't think so either.
Did we vote already?
Now we need to move to a vote if there's no more discussion. So is there any more discussion? Seeing none, I'd like to move to a roll call vote.
Can I go ahead and?
Yes, repeat the item.
Yes. So the motion is to approve the recommendation, and in item 2 of the recommendation, change it from general fund /U1/measure O and just have from the appropriate sources. And then add balance encouraging BUSD to build as many units as possible with being as family friendly as possible. And then add a letter going directly to council.
I don't like balance, but it doesn't matter.
We're not gonna wordsmith that.
I'm not gonna wordsmith, just
I
take
reject
the
your
vote.
friendly amendment. Yes, that's great.
You're not even the chair, the chairperson.
All
Let's take
right,
a vote.
so let's move to the.
It's all balancing.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Lord?
Yes.
Owens?
Yes.
Sharenko?
Yes.
Simon Weisberg?
Yes.
Tregu?
Yes.
Wolf?
Yes.
Wright?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next we have agenda item number 8, discussion and possible recommendation on operating funds for community housing development organizations.
I'm gonna excuse myself for agenda items 8 and agenda items 9 due to potential conflict of interest with my email RCD.
And Leah, don't you as well?
Miriam CD? No.
No.
Your jacket. Your
Well,
jacket,
I'll-
Miriam?
That's,
Your
it's not a
jacket.
developer.
I'm not
it's a
leaving the building.
management.
It's a,
It's
it's
a-
also, the one that I'm on only provides housing for the central housing.
Oh, okay.
I would like to say we had one member of the public that I'm aware of right now here speaking on this item. Well, at least one.
Wait, was it just for teachers or was it for all BSD?
It's all BUSD.
RCD could be continuing.
I mean, I would not, I would like to, I just don't wanna lose, I guess we have form, I just wanna get more.
We have form to lead them.
Can I make
So they were just voting to,
Can we,
This is a
I think
project-
we hear from staff first on this one, it would be helpful to those wishing to speak.
general to provide these funds, it wasn't to provide funds to the developer, it was to
Did you say
provide
when you
funds
have the this?
to develop a project. It wasn't to provide funds to a specific developer.
Let's turn all your speeches.
Also, if we can go ahead and kind of get regular order back again, and maybe, I don't know if we can shut that door.
Yeah. Set it up. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
So I think we will start by doing the staff report, then do public comment right after, I think for the purposes of context for what we're discussing, and then we'll move into our discussion of public comment.
So a little context, we're talking about the Chodo operating funds, and every year the city gets an allocation of home funding from the federal government, and a portion of that has to go to a Chodo-sponsored project. And a Chodo is a community housing development organization, and a Chodo has to meet certain capacity and board structure requirements in order to be considered a Chodo, and then they're eligible for this set aside of home funds. In addition to the development funds, there's also an optional 5% set aside of the home funds that can be used for operating support. And historically, the city has had 2 Chodos, Saha and RCD, and we haven't had a process for allocating the funds. We've been funding both Saha and RCD for years, just kind of as an automatic process. And maybe a year or 2 ago, we decided that that's, since this is an allocation of funds and is most similar to our community agency funding, we should really develop a process around how we allocate the Chodo funds. And also, it's a timely consideration because Bay Area Community Land Trust is applied to be a Chodo, so we anticipate having 3 Chodos, and we don't currently have a process. At the moment, we've been funding Saha or RCD. One of them would get the home funds, and then the other one would get a match of general funds. So we have kind of that little automatic pool of funds set aside, but we don't have a way to split it 3 ways. So we met with the Housing Custom Subcommittee to get their input on what priorities we should have for allocating these funds going forward. And those priorities are represented in the recommendation. I do want to apologize to both Saha and RCD. There is language on the second page that it implies that the funds would be automatically put back into the development pool if an eligible Chodo was not applying for funds. And that should have reflected the language of the recommendation itself, which says that that could be done, if the subcommittee, HAC, and staff choose. So the recommendation is to implement a competitive process, so issuing an RFP for these funds. And the subcommittee identified a priority to prioritize the funds for lower capacity Chodos to help support their development. And if through the competitive process, no lower capacity Chodo is eligible, then there would be the option of putting those funds back into the pool of home funds, and possibly general funds could be recommended for that Chodo. So that is kind of the overview and the context. I'm happy to answer questions.
And just for clarity's sake, because we have that public comment, it has to be specifically questions.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions at the moment, we'll open it up to public comment. So I have
Should we fill up cards?
I don't think so at this point.
I can get started if you don't mind. I'm Susan Friedland. I'm the director of Satellite Affordable Housing Associates. It's so nice to meet many of you that I haven't personally met before. We've been working in Berkeley for over 30 years. Over the course of the years, you've seen the work that we've done to create, we develop, own, manage, and provide supportive services to low-income residents in hundreds of units, homes around Berkeley that we've developed and own. We see ourselves as stewards of public assets. We utilize public funds to provide housing solutions to low-income people who've just been left out of the marketplace. And you guys have seen some of our projects come before you, some for many years, some since you've recently joined. One of the things we really pride ourselves on is being a Berkeley-based organization. This community housing development status is really about your capacity as a local organization and bringing the technical ability to create housing solutions to neighborhoods. And the way the Chodo program is written is to really support and encourage that. The grant is not a lot of money, but $30,000 per organization really helps pay for the cost of the project managers that do all the work of, like when you saw the school district proposal, creating these viable projects. So you need a staff person to go and do the zoning analysis, to go apply for the funding, to hire the architect, to oversee the construction, and that's really what the Chodo funds pay for. So this small, relatively small grant annually is something that we've really relied on to help support our work in Berkeley, keep us working in Berkeley, and pay for the staff that works on it. $30,000 put into a big $30 million project is helpful, but it pays basically for a bathroom. It doesn't go as far when you pay for capital money with this grant. So anyway, we appreciate the support we've gotten over the years. There was a time when it was competitive. Dan and I remember those days. The reason it hasn't been competitive process is that there was only 2 eligible organizations, and it seemed to make sense administratively to split this small amount of money between the organizations. And speaking for SAHA, we would be perfectly happy to compete. It's fine if the process is competitive, but we would really hate to see this precious money that's being used for staff time, us really not be even eligible to use it because we're not a low capacity organization. It almost seems counterintuitive to punish organizations that are not low capacity by disadvantaging them from the fund. So that's just a quick overview. We have really appreciated the support both financially, staff-wise, hack-wise, to do the work we've done over these decades in Berkeley, and we hope to continue doing it. So that's my 2 cents.
Should have went first. Some of the same comments, I think. I'm Dan Soslek. I'm the Executive Director of Resources for Community Development. I just want to say that, we're not concerned about having a competition or a competitive process. That seems perfectly great, actually, and I'm not upset that other people are jumping in the waters of trying to solve Berkeley's housing problems. I think that's also fantastic. I think the concern, or what sort of got me here tonight, was just the idea that there would be a process that would sort of make us less competitive, or potentially even signal losing the grant, which we've gotten for the entire history of the organization, actually 35 years, and we started as a smaller organization, and we've been able to kind of build our capacity. We've developed and or acquired over 500 apartments in Berkeley, and some of those actually were from organizations, other nonprofits that couldn't continue, and we came in and renovated them, and they continue to be really important affordable housing. We've been a major participant in efforts to increase the pool of funding for housing in the city, and I'm just delighted that we have gotten to be able to do that, and we're gonna see so much more affordable housing of all different types in Berkeley. I think it's a really exciting time. And I also kind of, I'll agree with Susan. I mean, we really appreciate the support from the HAC over the years, the council, the city. We've been a partner, and I think that's been an amazing relationship, and it's going to continue. $28,000 is not an insubstantial amount of money. It pays basically half of a less experienced project manager's salary for a year, or an asset manager, part of their salary. Those are the people that make sure that the existing housing that we are stewards of continues to be well maintained, really great housing for its residents and the community. So it does matter to us. I guess I would just ask you then to, consider going forward a process that allows us to compete, as a kind of an equal competitor. And also what I really would love is if you can find a way to actually fund all the really good nonprofits who are here today, who will be speaking to you about this. That would really be a huge win-win, and it would be wonderful. So thanks so much.
I also, Rick Lewis, as a member of the public.
Yeah. So the relative new kid on the block, we incorporated 13 years ago. And I have been around to have seen both RCD startup and Affordable Housing Associates. I know that they did both start as very small organizations. very much appreciate the support that the and the city council has shown through the small sites program. We are now in the midst of completing a project, or starting a project, I really should say, with the first allocation of small sites funding. So the idea of the competitive project process for us is not, in any way that we think our work is more important. It's incredible the work that Saha and RCD have done. But we offer a different model, and we just feel, even though, as Dan pointed out, Chodo money has been there for 35 years that they've been in existence, we're just saying we would like to have access to a portion of that. We're not asking for all of the money. I saw that the proposal was that perhaps priority be given to smaller Chodos, and there are lots of complexities about whether we currently have the capacity to do a home project, but as the staff report points out, that the Chodo funds are matched with funds from the general fund as well. So it would be possible, really, there's a good chance that the Chodo portion of that fund we really wouldn't even qualify for, at least initially. So that's really our role. We want to figure out a way that we can at least be at the table and have have a chance at getting some of those funds to really help build our capacity.
So,
Whatever you prefer, Jared.
yeah, I felt kind of a personal desire to kind of speak on sort of the discussions in the subcommittee that made this recommendation. So normally the practice is to have the chair, because you were technically the chair, right? You know, right?
It's a two-person subcommittee.
Yeah. So I think that, like, one of the reasons that I supported the recommendation as drafted is because I think that we have had a lot of, we have a lot of projects that come from RCD and Sinai, and you all have made a really truly tremendous impact in the community in Berkeley, and I think that that's something we can continue to invest in and build on. I think what we also look at, though, is there's more structures that support the kind of model that you all have in a broader context, and there's more resources that we can play with for that type of model. Whereas Chodo funding gives the ability to build new capacity for organizations that are trying different things. And so while I think we need resources for all different types of models, I certainly support this recommendation mainly because I think that it's one of the few opportunities we do have to provide that sort of support for newer, smaller groups in a developing capacity way to build out the possibilities of what we can do in the future. So at the same time, I understand the concern that you all shared, and I would certainly support finding other resources to support that, because I think there's just more of the resources we do have. I think there's more that supports the model that you all have, and I'd be happy to work with you all to figure out what that's going to look like. But that's sort of where I'm coming from on this one, and I just wanted to toss it over to Commissioner Trader for anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that is speaking for myself, I thought our vote did reflect those discussions. I will, in my personal capacity, share that since that recommendation, I also did have the opportunity to have a very good discussion with representatives from SAHA and RCD. And I learned a little bit more about the Chodo model and all the different constraints that are in place and how difficult it actually is to create a board that meets all of those types of requirements. And so I think, this is a great example of no one being at fault in particular, but it was just a combination of not doing enough close reading when folks are in a hurry, and a couple of words may have slipped by or gotten misinterpreted, probably a combination of both. What I would like to move is that we approve the recommendation, but with a couple of amendments. So one is at the end of line 5 in the recommendation, where it says lower capacity, strike lower capacity. So should the HTF subcommittee and HAC determine that no charter is eligible for the charter operating support, and then instead of what is written next, say that they would have the option to recommend that the charter operating set-aside be reallocated to the city's pool of home funds. So basically, there's still a proviso up front in the recommendation that does give us the opportunity to prioritize a newer charter, simply because, like I know for you, Rick, $28,000 is not exactly a drop in the bucket. And I've seen, I actually met the person that you hired, that your organization hired for the $50,000 that we provided for capacity building, and she is incredible. So that's like a really tangible impact that we can see, and that's awesome. But I wanted to end on a final amendment that I would like to make, and I thought about it listening to all 3 of your comments. I think this is truly, no pun intended, a model of cooperation and cooperativeness. And this is wonderful. That's what Berkeley should be all about. And so the final amendment would simply be that it is the sense of the HAC, as we make a recommendation to council, that whenever feasible, we should find a way to provide funding for all qualifying charters.
Just a clarification that this recommendation, staff have the authority to issue an RFP based on this recommendation. So
Okay,
it
so the
would-
recommendation would be to council and, well, this goes directly to.
This wouldn't go to
staff.
council, we'd be able to.
Then the recommendation
issue an
would be
RFP.
to staff directly.
And then kind of building on that, if through the RFP process, you wanted to recommend awarding additional funds, those contracts would have to go to council anyways, there would be an opportunity then as well.
Yes, I think I'm clear. And does this, in light of that context, do my proposed additions make sense? Are they feasible?
The changes to the language and then your recommendation,
Yes.
can you just repeat it one more time to
The recommendation?
the last addition? to
The last addition would simply be the sense of the HAC to staff that when feasible, staff should find a way to allocate charters across all qualifying organizations. Charter funding across all qualifying organizations.
Are we now in discussion or?
Yeah, since there's been a motion, I guess I'll second that, and then you're in the queue next for discussion.
But so he just took away the lower capacity though?
Not completely, because it still says that with priority given to lower capacity charters that would most benefit from the funding. That's in the first sentence, and that is still in the recommendation.
There was 2 portions of the recommendation. The first priority, what we should do with it, which still reads that it should be lower capacity, but then it had the second section that was just like, in the event we don't identify lower capacity or no one is able to apply for it, what do we do in that circumstance? And that one he broadened it out.
And what was it before?
Before it
yeah, please.
Before, it was that the charter operating set aside to be reallocated, and then the city would add general funds to do that as well.
So how is it different if you still have to be a qualifying organization? So if we don't find one that's a lower capacity, then it can only go to be qualified already. How is that different? How is your amendment changing it?
I think what happened is we caught an unintended technical error, or in that this could have been interpreted to mean that if there are no qualifying lower capacity churros, then there would be no competitive process after that. All the money would be allocated to home funding. And I think what our intent is to certainly prioritize those who are most in need of funding, but then if they don't exist or have not qualified for churro, then it would go to the more established organizations like SAFA and RCD, and only then, if some unforeseen reason that doesn't happen, then they would be reallocated to home.
So is there any more discussion on this particular item?
No, let's take a vote.
Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to a vote by roll call.
Okay, Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Lord,
Yes.
Owens,
Yes.
Sharenko,
Yes.
Item Weisberg,
Yes.
What you vote on?
Tregu,
This motion,
Si se puede.
and Wright.
Yes.
And just socialize all housing.
Motion passes.
I'm in. I didn't know we had that power. I would have made a motion a long time ago.
So the next item, I don't believe we have any members of the public for comment on the next item.
I can make a brief little presentation if you'd like. Is this a good time?
Sure, I have public comments.
Okay. Well, good evening again, Commissioners. The item you have before you is a really fantastic opportunity to very quickly transform what was going to be a market rate new construction project into 63 affordable homes for households earning potentially less than 80% AMI, or depending on the funding, less than 60% AMI. So really serving a range of incomes from deeply low income to getting closer to some of the city employee type housing that you were talking about. It's a really opportune time, both from a real estate perspective and from a funding perspective. We were able to make an offer and get site control on an entitled site on San Pablo, very well located, close to transit, high density, and really good design. At the same time as some new funding sources have become available at the state level, thanks to the bond we all voted for, hopefully all voted for and passed in 2018. So what I think is a really exciting opportunity, I know this item has come before you before, is really the possibility to move this very quickly from an empty lot into homes for people to move into. And so we really appreciate the recommendation for the $500,000 pre-development money. It is very expensive to get a project to the point where you can start construction. We are well beyond the early feasibility stage. The project is completely entitled, even have a building permit. So the minute we get the funding, we can start construction. Because with the city commitment, the pre-development money and the future city commitment would enable us to compete for this new state bond money along with 4% low-income housing tax credit, and we could be in construction really within a year. So it's a critical time. We're really grateful that the city has now U1 money and Prop O money, and this is exactly the kind of project we think the voters would love to see happen. So thanks so much for your time and consideration. Thank you for the staff and the staff report. And I'm delighted to answer any questions you have at all about the project, about the organization.
So I had Commissioner Trego in the queue, then Commissioner Sharenko, then Commissioner Sinai.
I move the item.
Thanks, my kids are waiting for me at home. That's okay.
I'm happy seconding that.
Oh.
Oh, you got it?
We got our second over here.
Okay. I got used this, I have a motion to vote already. Okay, is there any other discussion with that too?
No.
Just have a motion and second. Next, thank you, Commissioner Sharenko. Did you have any discussion with that?
No.
Commissioner Weisberg, is there any discussion you want to have?
Yes, so this is the property that I voted against it during, when it came to ZAB, because I felt that, I was convinced that the developer was lying about what he was doing. Because he was pushing through all of the waivers, claiming that he was, had this vision to provide
development.
Different
Central
development.
housing, and I think I thought he was lying. I think that there has been some advice to developers recently that the way to get through ZAB is to come up with some overarching story, and I thought he was lying. And I feel that the fact that he put it on the market I was right. And I just think it's the best happy ending that you ended with it, and I'm just thrilled beyond belief.
Yeah, we love getting things out of the hand of private developers.
Yeah, so I kind of was like, oh, sometimes you don't want to be right, but I was glad I was, and that it's just great that your organization is doing it. I'm just excited that you were able to do that. I also really wanted to commend Saha because you do your own management, and I think that makes a big difference. I do tenant work as my day job, and we have a lot of problems with John Stewart, and so I'm always relieved when clients come in and it's Saha, because I know you guys do. There's some cohesiveness because you do your own management.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that.
Commissioner Sharenko.
Yeah, this is a great project. I live super close to here. I love it. I'm very happy. I have a question, and I feel comfortable asking because I'm pretty sure this is out in the public record somewhere. What did you pay to be in town? What did Saha pay?
I did, oh wait, I have the information here, let's see. Yeah, about $5 million.
So he still made a profit.
They made some money, but they spent a lot of money getting the site entitled. I mean, it would have cost us, is this okay if I just chit chat like this? Okay. It would have
You were
cost,
answering my questions. That's smart to ask.
It cost us almost $1 million to get a project all the way through entitlements and have construction drawings ready. So the $5 million came with that, that was included.
I asked you to get a sense of how much that cost.
But it's a big price tag, and we definitely really wanted to make sure it would appraise for that site, and it was really worth it, and that the environmental conditions were, we did a lot of due diligence before,
No, I'm not criticizing. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, well, thank God you guys saved it.
Great, let's take a vote now.
Is there any more discussion? Seeing none, let's go ahead to a vote by roll call.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Lord,
Yes.
Owens,
Yes.
Schwanko,
Yes.
Simon Weisberg,
Yes.
Tregu,
Yes.
and Britt.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great night.
It's nice to have that item right back to back with the last one.
All right.
Madam Clerk, no equivalent?
Sure.
I'd like to move to extend till 10.
No, why?
No.
9:30. I move to extend till 9:30.
No, 9:30.
That's what
So it's-
he said, 9:30.
He's a 10 first.
I think 9:30.
He said
I
9:45.
thought there was this, so, whatever folks want. I think we can get through many upcoming items in 30 to 45 minutes.
Pick a number.
9:45.
Okay, 9:45 is the motion.
9:45?
9:42.
It's 9:30.
9:40. Okay.
I just think we don't seem to have a limit on what we're putting on the agenda, and is the expectation that meetings are supposed to go till 9 or till 10? Like, what is our?
There is no official rule except that's in a broader context in terms of city rules or commission guidance overall. We as a commission at some point set a general rule that we would try to keep meetings as structured and focused as possible so that we extend the time if it was past 9. But there's nothing that obligates us to that, I think, outside of our own personal preference.
Leah, the last few meetings have been going longer than I've ever seen in my history on this commission, which is a
Okay.
long history.
Let's not prolong this more.
This one item has
9:40.
been moved to the next month, right?
No, it's tonight. But I guess I would just, I don't know if I'm here finishing.
At this point, we're just discussing motions.
Chair, yes or no, has it been moved to next month?
I think
So we just moved to after.
Chair, I think he doesn't know about being recognized.
I've been letting it be a little bit more freeform, but I'm going to put more structure into it now. So right now, I'll say that you're kind of recognized in discussion for Igor's original motion, because you wanted to substitute it to be 9:30.
Well, I changed it to 9:30. That's now the motion.
Well, that's fine, I just would, I think my understanding is that the meetings went till 9, and so I think that we then have the agendas should reflect the expectation till 9, because no?
I don't think I have any authority to limit the items that are actually on the agenda, so that's up to the commission.
chair doesn't decide?
Oh, we do discuss the
Chair
agenda,
has
we do
the-
our
you can't-
best, but we don't.
I can't
want
take
to-
something off of it, I can only read over it.
Okay, well, anyway, I would then say 9 and then well, I mean, I'm not questioning today, but maybe we can talk about it so we have consensus. Because I didn't sign up to be at committee meetings till 11 every.
Yeah.
Oh, we've never moved past 10:05.
So I'd like to move to a vote on the item of extending the meeting to 9:30. Just end discussion of that.
We had a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second his motion. And then make a motion to just end discussion on it. All in favor of any discussion on this item?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and we do a roll call vote on extending the meeting.
Johnson,
Yes.
Lord,
Yes.
Owens,
Yes.
Sharengo,
Yes.
Simon Meisters,
Yes.
Bailey,
Yes.
Wolf,
Yes.
White.
Yes.
So meeting
Extending.
extended. I think we're just moving on to the next agenda item now, because we've extended the meeting. So I think we're on agenda item number 10. Is there any comment for agenda item number 10? Seeing none, I will turn it over to Commissioner Wolf and Commissioner Lord. Commissioner Wolf first, I think.
All right.
That's the committee.
So, we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about this if you will read what was sent to you via email and also passed out in a written packet. And what we're looking for now is we are looking for your input as to how you would prioritize funds coming from U1. You will see some restatement of what these funds are. We're not calling them U1 housing funds, so specifically because the way it was passed with a simple majority means we can't call them definitely housing funds. But that's the idea behind the measure that passed. So if you look at the front page of the little memo that I wrote up, what we want you to do is take a look first at what the results were of the poll that we took of what you put as priorities for strategies. 2, what your spending priorities are. And what I've done is I've given you a lot of background information that tells you what I believe is committed already without our saying much, and that is the anti-displacement work with the law center, rapid rehousing. It also includes administrative cost, which I think we're gonna be stuck with every year. And so I see that we have right now going forward about $4 million that we can be talking about and to go forward with that. One of the things that Mary Ann requested, she's not here to give me a clap, was to put together a big chart that shows, and this is at the end of attachment 4 in your report, that shows all the expenditures, whether or not there's money for them or not, but it represents commitments by the city to various groups. And when you look at that, you'll see, hey, look, there's almost $30 million that's been committed without actually money being appropriated. So this report gives you background information about what's currently being talked about, what has been talked about, what money's being collected. And we had a certain number of, if you look right now on page 2 of the report, it shows you what we had voted on last year for the $4 million that we had. And the anti-displacement is being paid for. The small sites program is something that we have allocated money for, but the other uses have not really been applied, except we were optimistic. We put admin costs at $50,000, and right now we're being asked to come up with $350,000 for U1. So, in other words, what my goal would be, and for the subcommittee, is that you give us your feedback, or tell us you don't have any feedback, one or the other, please, by a week from tonight. So tonight, what is the 4th? By April 11th, you communicate this to Mike. Everything goes through Mike. Then Mike lets us know, or lets me know, however the Brown Act is supposed to work. Then you can incorporate your comments into the recommendations, and you would have another draft to look at the May meeting. And so the subcommittee would be meeting at least one more time to look at a revised draft of this report. We don't have to drag this out. I mean, this is just, at this point, it's like, is this a kind of report we want to have going forward? Maybe the first one in the spring is, here's what we're proposing. The second one in the late fall would be, here's what we actually did. And it's not we, when I say we, I mean the city of Berkeley in terms of how it wants to show its spending its U1 funds. Does that make sense? But I can't do this without you guys, and it's like, please, we can reduce the time it takes in the meeting, because this is not new stuff we're looking at. It comes out of our work plan. I know that Alex and Leah are new, but so I'd be happy if it's okay to have an offline conversation. It's not a Brown Act if they wanted to know more about how you want and all that work. Because Leah said to me at the meeting just before it started, well, what's this all about? Read it, and if you have some questions, can she send them to Mike, and Mike can send them to me? Because there's no reason to take up time and make the meeting last longer. Just read it.
Well, I know this may not, well, can I?
Sure, I'm done.
I know it may be painful, but I do think that it's helpful to do it at the, when we're here. I guess my question for you is that, so I know that there was a survey that we were asked to fill out, which I sent, I think, late.
Yeah.
But are you saying that you want something beyond that in terms of?
Oh, if you want to. That's why I put all the work plan strategies as the first attachment here. So if you're saying, okay, well, I'm sort of new here, because this is on, it's within,
So Marianne, just so you know, I'm somebody who doesn't, not that I don't read, but I like having the discussion.
If you turn to page 7, you'll see a whole long list of work plan goals that were adopted during last year's work planning session.
Okay.
Right now, this is what we go on. I also have a URL link that you can go look more at if you want to, that flushes these out. So I pulled the ones that I thought sort of reflected what we had already done and recommended last year, threw in a few more that were politically popular, like the idea of these co-ops and limited equity stuff. And that's why I did the poll on those other strategies. Because you may look at this and say, oh, there's certain ones I really care more about. Let me throw them in when you respond to Mike. But so what we did is, this is based on strategies already adopted by the HAC, where we pull out a few and say, okay, this might make sense for you one.
But you're showing me a list of the work plan?
I'll clarify that.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to speak to offer a little of context, a little bit of context, and maybe I can help answer that or not. I guess we'll find out. I did a lot of preparation for the subcommittee meeting and for tonight, because I wanted to make sure I understood well. So I went back and I read like 2 years of council items, and these items all related to this, and read the ordinance and watched videos of meetings and things like that. So just to express my best understanding of all of this. Measure U1 sort of did 2 things. It said,
So let me just clarify. I understand what the case is.
Okay.
What I'm asking is, usually you guys give a presentation and then we actually have a conversation.
Oh, I'm happy to give a presentation. I even prepared one.
No, I know. So I don't think this needs to be a lesson for me. I guess I think either we are doing it tonight, or if you want to do it another night, but it's not I'm asking for a lesson for me. I thought you guys were going to present with the subcommittee just like we did with the other committees.
I'd be happy to do that. Tom is an outlier. He does not follow what the subcommittee does.
Excuse me, I think I had the floor. I'm not trying to give you a lesson, okay?
You could speak to the chair. I mean, you're not.
Sure. So Measure U1 asks us as a committee to come up with and recommend programs that the city can create to deal with the housing crisis. And if we can figure out how much they'll cost to say that. What it really doesn't do is ask us to take some specific budget, whether it's U1 or anything else, and divide that up. And we've, in the past, sent a lot of items to council offering to divide up the U1 budget and things like that. And the city manager has told council that we can't do that, they can't do that, that's not what we're supposed to do, and suggested that the positive thing we could do is to go back and look at that ordinance and start coming up with the ideas for programs the city might start to deal with the housing crisis and to recommend those, and if we can figure out how much they should cost the city, say that. But you know, then we kind of abandoned that and went back to saying, here, let's talk about splitting up the money, and the next time the city council said exactly the same thing. And the next time we tried to do that, it wound up being about splitting the money, and the city manager at that time said, okay, you know, I have no comments on this, but city council, here's this other thing tonight. And in 2018, city council authorized the city manager sort of for the next 2 years to potentially use the vast majority of the U1 money towards closing the funding gap on Berkeley Way. This memo, I mean, it is what it is. I don't see any advice in there about programs the city might start. The stuff about the budget, I would caution that you should take it with a grain of salt. It's a little bit, for example, one of the things it shows is the reconciliation report for U1. This is just the tax receipts versus what has actually, you know, been spent.
It's not in here, Tom.
Commissioner Lawrence.
It's not
Okay.
in here.
So I guess that was removed from this latest draft, so I won't mention that. But at any rate, you can't really infer from the materials that are in here any sort of specific housing budget that we're dividing up or anything like that. The budget materials just don't quite work that way. It does give you some idea of the history of spending and some of the commitments the city has made. But it's not like we're trying to take some amount of money and divide it up. So an example, I mean, what does it mean to like make up programs, to come up with program ideas the city might start? Well, you know, we have like, for example, this small sites thing, or we've talked about things like the Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act, and there's interesting questions about how those two things could fit together, because you know, staff helped us understand some of the limitations and problems they're running into, and it seemed like there were possible synergies, and that would be a good thing, as an example, possibly, for us to work on, to come up with a little bit of a recommendation about that and to include that in one of our reports. Now, the last thing I'll say is that it's been 2.5 years since this ordinance was passed, since the measure was passed. And I think it's time that the public starts to understand that we haven't actually implemented that yet, and we're certainly not on track to now. So it'll be 2.5 years. So that's going to be. I mean, I can't, you know, force anyone to do anything on this commission, but I can try and make sure that outside of this room, you know, people start to understand that you know, for 2.5 years, we just haven't really done that, haven't really implemented what they voted for.
Okay, so I had myself next, thank you, then Commissioner Trega. To answer what your question was, the reason we didn't do a full discussion right now is because it's something that's gonna go back to the subcommittee, and we're trying to use this as an opportunity to get feedback from the rest of the commission as a whole. So rather than us sitting here in this meeting going through the nitty-gritty details of what all of it looks like, you can get it in out of the actual like hack meeting setting, compile it all, bring something that has everyone's perspective put into it, back to the hack already draft, it's gonna draft it here. So that's why there's not a big discussion. There'll be one probably at the next meeting when we bring it back, but we wanted to kind of, the whole intention was to save the time of having to do all that in the meeting. So, I want to clarify that.
Thank you. So I am not ready to provide feedback tonight since I did receive this earlier in the week. However, I do intend to follow the requested process and provide my feedback to staff in the next week. And I wanted to thank the subcommittee, and in particular its chair, Marian, for the incredible amount of work that you did to pull this all together. I think this is really helpful, and I think this is going to make it easier, at least speaking for myself, to go through and based on the survey responses and priorities of the hack and my own priorities, make some recommendations. And I look forward to a productive discussion about this, which hopefully can be prioritized towards the beginning of the agenda next month. And I just wanted to Commissioner Lord's memo speak very, very briefly, only to say that there's a line in this memo that says, while a U1 subcommittee has been repeatedly formed and has repeatedly sent referrals to council, none of those referrals has been passed or implemented, and none have satisfied our B10 obligations. I must have a very different recollection than the commissioner who wrote this, and either we have a very different recollection of the facts, or I would posit that this statement is an opinion. My own recollection is that while we did initially provide some U1 recommendations to council, it did get sent back to us for a second pass. We provided that second pass. I believe we had 2 very robust discussions at least before we did that. And then we passed our recommendations on to council, and they were added to the budget process, and the council directed the city manager to consider our recommendations. So we may philosophically sometimes agree with the city manager, and other times, like on the use of Premier Crew, using funds from U1 revenues for something that would not be used as housing immediately, because I think that is one of the philosophical disagreements here. That's fine, but I just wanted to point out that in terms of the facts, those are the facts. We have been doing our job as a commission, and I think with the subcommittee and the work that they've done, we can expand on that and provide even more by way of valuable comments to the council. Thank you.
So I'll turn it over to Commissioner Lord now, but I want to just provide the caveat that a lot of the feedback you're providing can be done in written format to the subcommittee, and we can take that into consideration moving forward just for purposes of time.
My colleagues should review the minutes from the June of 2018 city council meeting. I believe that's what he's referring to. The recommendations that were sent at that time were not acted upon. The city council, I actually took action to say they would take them into consideration, but did not refer them to the budget process or to the city manager. And in fact, that night, if you look at the item, the city manager's note on our item that night advises city council to instead consider a different recommendation from the city manager. That one they did pass. So yeah, I actually, we disagree on a matter of fact, but now you know, and you can go back and take a look and see if you still feel the way that you do about what happened there. And I would also say that if we had done a sort of B10 report in 2018, then first of all, it should have been published as such on the city website, and the city council should have made a formal reply to it. Neither of those things happened because that wasn't the B10 report.
Commissioner Wolf,
No, I'm not down with this.
All right, so I'm gonna just say 2 things. On page 2 of this draft, we have 3 expenditures that are listed. There are 5 altogether. That anti-displacement was one of our recommendations, and money is being spent for anti-displacement. Number 2, small sites program. Money has definitely been allocated in the first $50,000 given to the Bay Area Land Trust. And then number 3, and admin costs have been definitely taken out. So 3 out of the 5 recommendations have been visible. The fact that it's not on the city's website, and that's something, I know our work plan was not on the city's website, but it was on the HAC website. So I don't know website, but if we get this on our city, our commission website, that's part of the course of action. I feel that politics are one thing, commission mandates are another, and all we can do as a commission is refer to the council, and whether or not the council listens or doesn't, that gets into the world of politics. That's all I want to say.
Is there any more discussion on this item? Seeing none, we will move on to item number 11. 13, no, sorry. What is wrong with me?
Oh, one thing, can we change the calendar for the subcommittee being sunset at the end of April and move it to June 30th, please?
I second the
Second.
motion.
Sorry.
Okay, motion and second by Commissioner Wolf, second by Commissioner Simon Weisberg.
To extend to when, sorry, June.
To extend the life of this subcommittee, the lifeline, to June 30th.
Any discussion? Seeing none, let's move to a roll call vote.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Ward?
Abstain.
Owens?
Yes.
Sharenko?
Yes.
Simon Weisberg?
Yes.
Trigger?
Yes.
Wolf?
Yes.
Wright?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Chairperson, is 13 being moved ahead of 11 and 12, or is 11 and 12 not be taken up?
It's moved ahead, but I moved it in my computer document, so now it's the new 11 for me, but it's the subject of the smoking ban is the next item I have.
So you want to extend the time?
Let's see if we can get close in the next 10 minutes. We actually agree on this item.
I haven't heard a motion to extend time, so we'll just continue forward, so I'm sure.
Sure.
Does
So-
public comment go first?
Oh, yes, public comment.
Okay. You want to go first or me?
Either way.
Okay, you can go.
Okay. My name is Carol Denny. Thank you so much for putting this on your agenda, and I'll try to be brief. Next time, could you not call it a smoking ban? That's tobacco industry propaganda right there, and I know it's really easy to pick up. It seems to just flood out of most people's mouths. If you worked on this legislation, you would never use it. The public health community would be the first to remind you that Berkeley doesn't have a smoking ban. Berkeley has public health-based smoking restrictions. And there's a big difference between those two things. So, and I'm sorry if that sounds petty, it actually is really important public health education to make that distinction. So, I guess I've always felt as though the complaint system for reporting non-compliance in multi-unit housing was gonna be a problem, and that's certainly borne out by this moment 5 years in, when clearly even with this only online, only in English, difficult to use complaint form that makes everybody swear on pain of perjury that everything they say is true, and ask questions they can't possibly know that well, because where's the smoke coming from is kind of difficult to tell in a multi-unit housing building. Very often you just don't know. And that'll be the end of your complaint, pretty much. So it's clear though that even though the survey also is English only and online, it's showing us that at least half the people in this unrepresentative sample are experiencing secondhand smoke exposure, and only 7% of them are even trying to make a complaint. So I'm really looking forward, if it is at all possible, to working with any of you who wish to work on improving a complaint system, which at this point is only something you can mail in, or you have to go up to the second floor of the public health building and put it in by hand. We're, at an age now where I would hope there would be multiple ways to register a complaint, and that complaint process could even be anonymous for people who need to protect their identity for one reason or another. And I'm glad to see some of you nodding there. I wasn't sure whether you would understand what that's about, so I won't go on. But creating alternative ways. Some people are just much more comfortable calling and trying to tell their story to a human being. And that should be absolutely fine. It should be no problem at all. I love the idea I saw in a draft form of involving the inspectors of the city of Berkeley. That would be so helpful for people who, and is that the end of my public comment? Could I just ask a couple questions briefly? Did this survey go to any of the other commissions?
People letter?
Like the draft questions for the survey?
The survey itself, I guess the results? Did any other commission see this?
Wasn't that a Berkeley considers survey?
I don't know if they've seen I don't think anyone's seen the results except for us at this point. but-
I see, okay. And did my written remarks, I sent in about 3 pages, make it to this? Oh, good, thank you so much.
Yes, I read those one without sign. Good.
So I would like to comment on, has somebody who has lived in 2 different residences or complexes, buildings, since this ordinance is passed, and largely, the ordinance just doesn't have a lot of teeth. Because it's not really enforceable, primarily because of, or greatly because of the anonymous thing. A lot of people just don't wanna make complaints. The first place I was a resident, I could say yes. The second place, I was also property manager for a while and for several months, and so I can talk about it from that perspective. I actually like the idea of landlords being required to intervene. I see that it was believed by the subcommittee that was thought to be too stringent. I actually think the landlord should have to feel some investment in and intervene. And I am pleased about the recommendation under enforcement where someone could make an anonymous complaint. I can tell you when I was property manager, there were 6 particular tenants who were smokers who were complained against. 5 of those, the persons making the complaints did not want to be known. Had I not been willing to intervene, it would have just been, they wouldn't have done anything about it. They did not want to become public about it. The 6th person did make a public complaint, did make a complaint officially, and they made it to the city. And I'm gonna refer to this part about the photographic evidence. That person actually sent some photographs to me too. This person has clearly never compiled or evaluated evidence because they had no idea even how to take a proper photo showing the person had been smoking. So if you're gonna put that burden on people, you really need to tell them what is needed to actually satisfy a complaint. But the anonymous thing is really, really important. People just don't wanna snitch on their neighbors. They want somebody else to be the enforcer and somebody else to extract the facts. When I was a property manager and put the pressure on, when I was property manager, I put out memos. And even that was uncomfortable because without going into too much information, that I had to report to as such it was one of the smokers. And so I would put out memos, I put out memos about the city procedures, to try and put, enough information out there that it was strictly banned. And I believe it made a slight improvement, but I was told that people were still smoking. So I actually think it needs to be tightened more than this subcommittee has recommended. Otherwise, it's really a useless law that many people are not following. I agree with the subcommittee about the cannabis not being included because it would be a distractor. It may be a valid point, but you'd get people coming up and just saying this is banning marijuana, and just it would take the focus off the tobacco smoke not being allowed in multi-unit housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I make a motion to extend to 9:45,
Second.
9:50.
Second.
Is that enough to finish this?
Probably not, but when we hit
Let's
45, I'll do it again.
see. I think it could be enough.
It's been a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? Seeing none.
I'm not sure it's necessary. This isn't agendized for action tonight. I spoke with the secretary earlier, so really all I want to do is alert people that this was handed out tonight. This draft memo will return, and I wanted to get into people's hands tonight so that they would have a chance to contemplate it with as much time as possible. The quick and easy guide is the overview of recommendations. Some of the reservations that were expressed in the comments, I think, are legitimate, but also very hard to fix in the ordinance. So we have tried to do what we can to allow anonymous complaints, to allow complaints to be verified as part of the residential housing safety program, rather than having to go through the 2 wet signatures, sworn complaints and things like that. So we'll talk more about it then. Of course, one of the concerns also is, tenant protections, and that was another reason I wanted to get it out early tonight, so that people could contemplate those things. I'll take the other 2 items I have in consideration.
Okay, but it's 3 minutes to ending.
Yeah.
We can't do it in 3 minutes.
There's nothing
There's
to
nothing
do.
to do, we just table those other 2 items.
Can I
and
just
like
ask
this.
something really fast? Would it be beneficial at all, we have 2 interesting documents, one from Carol and one from Tom that were passed out tonight. I already have some thoughts about these before Tom would come back with his next item in May. Can I send them to Mike and Mike can provide them to Tom? It would just be based on these 2 documents.
Can we just extend the time so we can
Yeah.
discuss?
I don't, you guys think we're doing all this in 2 minutes?
It was a motion, you gotta vote, right?
Let's just-
Yeah, there's a
let's just
motion,
vote.
is there a second for the Commissioner?
Second.
So all those in favor?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What is the time you suggested?
9:45.
So I vote no.
All those opposed?
Me.
Abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes. So in terms of agenda, Commissioner Lauren has given the update on multifamily, on the public health-based smoking restrictions. And has agreed to table the other 2 discussion items till the next meeting, so that just takes us to the update on council items, I believe.
Can we have a discussion on this
Discussion
item?
on this item? Oh. In terms of the queue, I have Commissioner Trigger and Commissioner Wolf next, then signing orders.
Thank you. So, we had a meeting in subcommittee yesterday, and Carol was there, and her input was invaluable. And I really appreciate the work that my colleague, Commissioner Lord, has done. And we were basically in agreement on this recommendation. And so I would like to, as with the item we just finished, request that this be taken up towards the beginning of the agenda next time. I also, I probably don't feel, I no longer feel that we need to meet again in subcommittee. I think we've done our work pending everyone's input here, but also next month. I would like to see this move forward towards a vote. And the 2 quick comments I would like to make, and thank you, Commissioner Lord, for taking the less than 24 hours we have between now and then to wrap this up. I would put the RHS integration with our proactive RHSP inspections actually towards the top of the, it was mentioned obliquely somewhere in the memo, but that's really the cornerstone, I think, that we talked about. Now that staff will be going out and every 5 years inspecting multifamily housing, they could, not just with this one, but with the elevator ordinance and all these others that are complaint driven right now, have a checklist and inspect at the same time conformance to those ordinances, including this one. So I would suggest that that be highlighted, and allowing tenants to use other complaint mechanisms, including anonymous complaints using an online form, that could go under improving access. So I would suggest also moving that up and making it a little bit more visible. Those are my only comments. I'd love to hear from colleagues now, or look forward to discussing this further next month.
I again want to reiterate that I think we should have our comments be directed towards the staff and be compiled with something. Well, I guess you'll meeting again. You'll have to meet again, won't you?
Unless we fundamentally
On
have
the basis
to.
of this, no, that's just, but,
But why, I don't
just
understand
one
why
more
we
person in the
can't.
queue, we can discuss this.
We could meet again. My feeling was that we reached consensus on the subcommittee, and so
Okay, so it's
if
actually for fun.
if the comments are kind of along the lines of what I just mentioned, just accentuating the memo, then that can probably be done between now and then. If there is a fundamental objection or disagreement with a component of any of this proposal, then certainly we probably may need to meet again.
I think I had Commissioner Wolf and then Senator Weisberg, and I accidentally crossed you up too soon, but, so Commissioner Wolf and then.
Oh, okay. I just want to say that I thought Carol Denny, I can call you Carol, I've seen your name for so long, made some additional good points, like language, big idea. And I would just like to pull a few ideas from here along with ideas that occurred to me when everybody's been talking and looking at what Tom wrote, and then just send those to Mike in an orderly fashion. And, you know, for me, writing is the best way. And when we try to get all the words just right, like when we're trying to wordsmith something, it can take us another 10 minutes. So I do like the idea of sending this, and that I like some of your ideas, but I'm not gonna even get to the cannabis stuff. That's a whole other topic. And I don't think the hack is the one to be dealing with it. We'll just talk about tobacco. Smokes.
Commissioner Senator Weisberg.
So I guess I'm a little bit confused by that we're all writing our notes up as if we're not talking, because this is our one time to bounce off of each other in terms of thoughts. So I won't be doing that, but I will be sharing now. But I guess, you know, from the perspective of advocating for tenants, I guess my concern is that when the consequence of smoking was gonna mean somebody's going to get evicted, and I guess I have a couple concerns. One is, in terms of the surveys, I was interested to know how many were controlled, how many were long-term tenants, and also the disparate impact in terms of race. When we look at who is still maintaining, who still has an addiction in our society, it's folks of a certain age, and you know, like really high levels of amongst certain communities, particularly African Americans and Latinos. And so one of the reasons that the tenant community has basically fought these, and it was really clear that these laws had to be, essentially if you were already a tenant, you couldn't suddenly be told you could no longer smoke. I am not promoting this addiction. From public health, it is a huge problem. But in states where they've done this, there's been a huge increase in people then smoking in cars with their children because they can't smoke in other spaces. There's been all these studies done where in affordable housing properties, particularly in cold states where there were very few tenant advocacy, where they were done immediately, it made people smoke more with children, and it's just like all these things of like you can only smoke from this foot to that foot, and so
That is not true. Yeah,
Public
I
comment.
apologize for interrupting, but that is not true.
I've been at conferences where people who run these affordable housing projects, there was a study done out of Montana that was really problematic. So my concern is I'm concerned about how the information we're having is not, we don't have teased out whether these are rent-controlled units or new construction, and how the issues around grandfathering it in. I think it's one thing to have properties where you're a new tenant post 2014 and there's certain rules about tobacco use, but I'm just concerned about how there's going to be disparate impacts, and I think that's been the reason that the tenant advocates are uncomfortable with these. I would say it's a huge issue in terms of we have clients come in all the time who, these kids have asthma and their neighbor is smoking. It's a huge problem. But I think that because, like, the consequence is somebody's going to get evicted, that I'm not sure how you can have an anonymous complaint. I think in terms of common spaces, I think that's fine, because it doesn't, like, if in the common spaces there is smoking, that's an issue and it kind of doesn't matter. But if you want to be anonymous, but I don't know how that landlord can take, I mean, it's just gonna be an issue in terms of anonymous, so I think that I'm concerned about that. I do think that this maybe should be, whatever recommendations should be shared with the rent board, and that should be maybe a side referral. Because I know that when they did the initial legislation, that the rent board had a role in talking about it. I also don't see how this is gonna help for folks who are addicted to tobacco, who live in those units.
I can help with all of these things. I wish I had more chance to
unfortunately,
speak.
the
You
public comment
really
section
need
is over.
to connect with the public health community, because we address
So
all of
unfortunately,
these
the public
concerns.
comment section is over.
I am so sorry. I
just wanna-
apologize.
Thank you.
So I think that we have to figure out how we, do the balance. I mean, I think that one of the things that I have always wanted is that, to me, the process should include, here are free services for, I'm always shocked at how many folks don't have access to, I know Kaiser pays for tobacco, wear the patch and all of these things, but not everybody has access to that, and so I think that I'm more interested in going.
Yes,
that
they do
direction.
through the city of
Ma'am,
Berkeley's
were you-
public health policy.
So-
Yeah, but what she's saying is not true.
If
I'm
we
sorry
continue to
for
have,
this question.
yes, if we continue to have outbursts from the public, I'll have to ask you unfortunately to leave, so please be respectful of the process.
Well, good luck with that.
It's part of the authority.
This is life or death for some of us.
I understand that, and I understand your concern, and I hear that, but we have a process to follow.
You do not want disinformation in this public record, and you need to educate
There's no
yourselves better.
action that's
Yeah.
being taken today. You're welcome to do public comment if it comes up again in the future. I'm just a bit of
Next month again.
So I wondered if the subcommittee had talked about all those different pieces, and how do we wanna?
Will there be time to answer?
Oh, we don't need to, do we?
Commissioner Schrank on the queue next, followed by Commissioner
You
Lord
can
on the queue
extend
next.
time.
Yeah, you don't have to extend, see, people are a long one. I'm sorry, we're gonna have questions.
So Commissioner Lord, you're next.
Thank
Can
you.
you have a motion to extend time?
No, I just wanted to add a little bit of information, that when we started this last year, we asked staff for information about how often it had been applied and so on. And specifically asked if they at least had any knowledge of evictions resulting from this law so far, and the answer that is none. None has ever occurred. I wonder, if people have come to the rent board saying they're being evicted for that reason. I kind of suspect not.
Which is replicated nationwide. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, nothing in the law compels an eviction or even asks for one. If a smoker basically does not voluntarily quit, about the worst thing that can happen to them is an infraction. I realize that doesn't fully answer some of the concerns raised, but it does hopefully add a little bit more information.
So Commissioner Schrank on the queue, followed by Commissioner Schrank.
Yeah, so I appreciate all these concerns. The only thing I want to add is that I think it is really important that complaint-driven systems like this allow anonymous complaints. I think the city makes the mistake very often of not allowing that, and it just creates a situation where you have neighbor versus neighbor. And it absolves the city of a lot of controversy or work on their side, but it's really disruptive to living situations, to neighbors. I see this a lot with permanent, unpermanent construction, but it's the exact same thing with any complaint-driven system. And the other thing I'll say, which is going to be probably a lot more controversial, is cannabis should be included. I think you're asking people to differentiate between sources of smoke, and maybe I'm now giving away a lot about myself, but I can't necessarily do that. I don't know that I would even be able to tell a lot of the cases, depending on what someone is smoking, and I think it's silly to try to ask someone to say, is that tobacco smoke or is that cannabis? I don't think, from a public health point of view, and I'm admitting my ignorance here, I don't even know if it matters. So there's my thought.
It doesn't.
It does.
Well, I'm sure someone knows. I don't, and that's fine.
I know that in
State of
cannabis.
California's list
Okay, well,
of carcinogens.
well, I didn't mean to open the door, but okay.
So, first
I'm
of all,
Commissioner Treg, I'll be the queue next time. At this point, it's Commissioner Treg's floor, so if he wants to extend time.
Yeah, motion to extend time till 9:50.
second.
And a motion and a second. Let's just go directly to a vote. There's no discussion. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of extending time to 9:50?
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Any abstentions? Seeing none, or seeing one, abstention and one opposition, motion passes.
Okay, so I want to just voice appreciation, first of all, to Leah for, this is why I think it's good to talk through things, and I appreciate you bringing up your concerns. I wanted to make, just kind of for my own information, to tease out what the subcommittee, whether the suggestions that Commissioner Simon Weisberg is making are something that she would like our subcommittee to address, or whether it's something that she would like the city to take up, because I think these were slightly different areas of who would be responsible or has control over. So in terms of studying patterns, in terms of who filled out the survey, because this was a Berkeley Consider survey, I think there's no way to know. It's not a very reliable indicator. And in fact, I was looking at some of the responses. Some of them are not even tenants, some of them are property owners, some of them are former tenants, some of them have moved out of the city,
You
but
don't know,
felt
you don't know
strongly enough
anything about the
about this
units or the
issue.
demographics at all.
So I don't know if, I mean, I'll be frank, I think the only thing that is within the power of the subcommittee that we can actually do something about is to relook at the recommendation to allow complaints to be filed anonymously, and maybe limiting it to common spaces. In terms of sharing information with the rent board, I think that's a great idea. I would suggest that we separate out this recommendation though because that's something you and I can work on, frankly, to bring to the rent board for consideration. What I would actually suggest, and I just want to make sure we don't run into Brown Act issues doing this, but similar to how 3 commissioners got together and put up the USD ordinance or recommendation that we brought to their hat, it might be more efficient to have 4 people that feel most interested in discussing this further. Like Leah, I would love to just meet with you sometime and talk through these issues. We can bring something back that could be a consensus item. Is that possible, or do we really need to extend the subcommittee for 1 more month and allow no more than 4 people to be on the subcommittee, or can 4 people just work on this?
I would advise against that. You can send me, and I would just say no.
Yeah, I was going to echo the same thing. I think part of what I've been suggesting a little bit has been that we at least start some of these conversations within writing as one-way communications, only so that our discussions can be more focused and pointed, and then alternative like amendments, and this can be already drafted, and we can have a clean start before the discussion point. And then we can continue to have that conversation later on, is why I keep emphasizing this idea of like this communication, just to make these meetings run a little bit more smoothly.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I will have to make a motion then to extend the life of the subcommittee for 1 more month.
So I don't think that can happen because it's not discussion.
Oh, it's not an act, okay, so.
But
Well, the subcommittee automatically dies, so.
They have to wait till 30th.
That's true, we can still meet once more this month. Okay, that could actually work. I think maybe just in closing, what I wanted to say is just to provide some context to this. So this was passed in 2013, so we can consider this a 5-year review. And the rent board was very much at the table in actually making sure that whatever is passed is minimizes punitive power towards, in particular, longer-term tenants. My feeling is that the recommendations that the subcommittee made does not change the fundamental architecture of that. And I would have something to say in objection if it did. That's why I actually volunteered to be on the subcommittee to make sure that long-term tenants are still protected, but that we at the same time take a 5-year look and see if we can't improve the efficiencies of some of these processes, because tenants beating their heads against the wall and not being able to, filing complaints but not feeling like anything they say makes a tangible impact. That's not a sustainable solution either. So I think our recommendations are very fine-tuned towards the process of filing complaints and the accessibility, and then what the city does with them, and does not propose to change anything that was endeavored 5 years ago specifically to protect long-term tenants and those kinds of difficult situations. So with that, maybe if you have any other comments, we would appreciate an email to staff maybe in the next week, so by a week from now, April 11th as well. And then we may need to meet again.
Is there any more?
You can always reappoint the subcommittee in May if you wanted to add more members to. That's an option.
Excellent. Trying to get myself off one.
Okay. Is there any more discussion on this
I didn't
update?
quite hear what you said. What you said?
We can always appoint a new subcommittee in the May meeting. Is there any more discussion on this update item? Seeing none, I believe Commissioner Lord, you pulled the next 2 items that you had. So I think that leaves only just the updates on council items.
Sure. Just real quick, the missing middle item, I thought you all would be interested in that. It was passed by council and referred to the city manager to bring back to council a report of potential zoning revisions that can foster a broader range of these missing middle housing types.
I'm sorry, I'll ask that.
And just real quick, the remaining items are just the half recommendations to council as scheduled.
I was just wondering when the CBG items were running.
Yeah, that is on the agenda for the 23rd. I have it there. It's the community agency funding.
23rd of this month.
We know Mr. Powell will back.
Yes.
Are you sure that the missing middle item passed council? I didn't
No.
think they took it up yet.
It got continued to
Yeah.
April 29th.
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have read the agenda wrong.
Sorry, wasn't changing.
So as of now, since we've reached 9:50, I believe our meeting is adjourned.
Yep.
So.
That's it.